Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 103 of ThROH The Years, the podcast reviews Ring of Honor show by show from the beginning. My name is Trevor Dame, joined as always by the co-host Matt Feuerstein. Matt, it's a new year. Off to a great start. My laptop might be dead, so I'm doing this from a backup device. So I'm going to give a big warning to everybody. Usually one of the things I do on the show before I get ready, I do extensive notes for everything, and I reread my notes to catch what's usually about 15 to 20 typos because I write my notes very haphazardly. Didn't have time to do that tonight, so I am sure I am going to say a lot of wrong words probably on this episode. So off to a great start in 2023, Matt.
I don't even correct my typos. So that's a bully on you for even bothering to do that in the first place. But I actually have I have some news. I have it on good authority, and I think I have some reliable sources here that 2023 is the newest year on record. There has never been a year as new as 2023 is right now.
It's got that new car smell. It's fantastic.
It's just the most new a year can be. So I respect 2023 for being so new, and hopefully it'll stay this new forever. That's my wish for 2023. But yeah, how are you, Trevor? In this new year?
Not great. Laptop fried. You know what? Other than that, I'm doing great, Matt. I'm doing great. Other than that one trivial thing, but yeah. Speaking of how new things can become not new, we've one piece of news between the last Ring of Honor show and this one. It's only kind of tangentially Ring of Honor related, but it's kind of interesting. This is the time period where TNA got in on the Jim Cornette love because so this is from the Pro Wrestling Torch at the time. They wrote a whole story about how Jim Cornette had signed with TNA at this time to be, shockingly, Matt, their commissioner or some honor figure at the least. They write in the Torch, Cornette has recently been working on a few shows for Ring of Honor and acting as the commissioner of that promotion. He will remain in that position despite also having an on-air role with TNA in upcoming months. In a statement released on Ring of Honor's website, where Cornette is the on-air authority figure for ROH, Cornette said, quote, I have verbally agreed to a limited number of TNA dates. This will not interfere with my Ring of Honor commitments. I am committed to Ring of Honor dates throughout this year and beyond. So, yeah, it's one of those funny moments where, a lot of TNA Ring of Honor crossover right down to now Jim Cornette. And this was probably, I know he would be involved in Ring of Honor in a major way on a next run through in the Sinclair era, but in a way this was kind of like the last peak of Jim Cornette as a real on-air player in wrestling in a major way, where he was simultaneously now the authority figure for, you could argue, the number 2 and number 3 promotions in the US at this time.
I don't really remember his TNA stuff from this time at all. How long was he with TNA? Because I really don't remember that. I obviously remembered the ROH stuff because I watched it more closely, but I watched TNA a bit, and I don't remember his TNA run.
Yeah, I don't remember how long. My TNA memories are blissfully foggy. A lot of hammer work has gone into producing that mental state, but I you know what, Matt? One thing I can tell you without remembering, I'm sure it didn't end well.
Yeah, well, I think, wasn't Russo brought back by the fall of that year?
Yeah, wasn't that one of the ones where Cornette made some kind of threat via an email or something? Or there are so many that it's hard to keep track. But that brings us to the show we have today. A special delight, Matt. We're covering today How We Roll, which took place May 12th. 2006 at the Sports Plus Entertainment Center in Lake Grove, New York, in front of a reported crowd of 650 fans.
The second time I had the pleasure of going to Sports Plus to watch a Ring of Honor show.
What a show you picked, man. The Observer wrote, and Matt, Dave is slandering you here then, knowing that you were at the show. Dave wrote in the Observer, Ring of Honor ran May 12th in Lake Grove, New York, which is on Long Island, and drew a far less enthusiastic than usual crowd. The crowd took the show down, and it was said to have been a decent show, but not the usual standard. Crowd was 650 fans, and among those at the show were Mick Foley and Brian Gerwertz, who may have been there to see Christian, Dave speculates. But yeah, obviously Mick Foley, Long Island guy, you said,
Yeah,
hey,
he lived like legit, like quite close to Sports Plus. Like it's not even just Long Island. Like he lived in that region, so it was very convenient. I think he even said on the last time he was at ROH that he helped like broker the deal between the venue and ROH. So that's how much of an attachment he has to Sports Plus.
and so, Mick putting his, there was a lot of people, probably that claimed to be fans of Ring of Honor that came by as legends for a cup of coffee or something. But, Mick Foley put his money where his mouth is, so to speak, where, his WWE, he can't appear on the show anymore, but he's still showing up when they're in his area, he's still attending. And
he was a big part of WWE TV during this time period. So, that's definitely, he's really showing up for ROH here, literally and figuratively.
But Long Island crowds had a bad rep in Ring of Honor, Matt. I did not think this crowd was very good. I did not think it was necessarily as bad as some of the reviews and Dave is making it out to be. And I will say this, I don't think they had a ton to work with on this night.
So I was at this show. I was at a bunch of ROH shows in Long Island. So when I went to Glory by Honor in September of 2005, I thought that crowd was fine. Like, pretty good. When we watched the DVDs of Sign of Dishonor and A Night of Tribute and Unscripted 2, I thought those crowds were not spectacular, but solid, especially Sign of Dishonor. I thought that was actually a pretty good crowd. But I knew of the rep that Long Island crowds had, not just for ROH, but even for WWE back then. And this crowd was bad. It's a different kind of bad than maybe some of the other bad crowds that we've seen, which, I'll maybe get into more of the specifics as we watch the show. It definitely was worse live than it was on video, but no, I think I'm pretty fair in my judgment of crowds. This was a bad crowd. And I do think that there are things on this show that would have been better with different crowds.
Yeah, I mean, there were some snarky comments. There were some things that they were quiet for, but I will say at the worst, it was a combination of a bad show and a bad crowd. Tipping my hat early here, but we will then go to how we open the show. We open backstage with Lieutenant Commissioner Adam Pearce. So this is the first show post Jim Cornette knee surgery where he can't attend shows in person for a while. So Pearce has been the Lieutenant Commissioner in Pearce says he just got off the phone with Jim Cornette, who Pearce tells us is recovering from surgery. Pearce says he has a message for Homicide. He says they're fighting a losing battle against CZW, Ring of Honor that is, and he points to the ugly scar on his head he suffered at a recent show. He points out BJ Whitmer's neck is hurt. Now Samoa Joe has an injured knee. And so he's asking Homicide to enlist and join the war for Ring of Honor. And he says, do it for yourself. Don't do it for anyone else but yourself. He goes, I know deep down your heart beats for Ring of Honor. Pearce says he's tired of getting his fucking head kicked in. That's a Bryan Danielson line. And asks again for help. Pearce then transitions his promo to CZW's Chris Hero, Claudio Castagnoli, and Necro Butcher, and he says he hopes they come here tonight. He says he and BJ Whitmer are ready, willing, and able to fight in Lake Grove, New York. So yeah, opening promo. So this is this feels like the real start of the. It'll be interesting to see how it kind of plays out in practice, but definitely this is the start of where they're really overtly going to Homicide, we need your help. We really need your help right now.
And also, it wasn't on the the DVD proper, but the ROH Video Wire, Cornette himself did a promo the week before this, beckoning Homicide to join the fight for Ring of Honor. So this is sort of a continuation of that. So I think the Cornette promo on the website was actually the beginning, and then this is the beginning on the actual DVDs. I always say it's kind of weird where you have that website continuity, live event continuity, and then the DVD continuity, and they're sort of slightly different. I guess the video wires are trying to bridge that gap a little bit, but
Yeah,
yeah.
then eventually we get into the pay-per-view continuity having to get
Yes,
added
yes,
in.
yes.
That'll be a fun time. But
Oh boy.
yeah, in fact, I think if we watched this, we had a video file to get this. But if you had the actual DVD, I believe this was one of those shows where the video wire was on the DVD, so you could have watched the Cornette promo and then watched the Adam Pearce promo that said a very, very similar thing. Which that
Yeah.
was the other thing. Sometimes there'd be some redundancies and stuff like the video wires.
Every DVD from here on out, as long as the video wires existed, would also have the video wire attached to it.
So at this point, we cut to Nigel McGuinness backstage, who says they're here in some Long Island in New York. He says at the last show, Bryan Danielson, that clam digger, that clubfoot, he couldn't get back in the ring with him, couldn't beat out the count. And Nigel thinks maybe Danielson didn't even want to get back in the ring with Nigel. Maybe he lost by count on purpose. Nigel says it's only a matter of time before he's wearing Danielson's world title in addition to his pure title, and he's the best pure champion in the world. So, just reiterating the Nigel thing, and if you believe, the reporting we read after that recent show where Nigel wrestled Danielson, Gabe didn't even decide that that was going to be more than a one-off till that match was so great. So I imagine here, next show, Gabe instantly just goes, okay, well, we better shoot a quick little promo just to keep that in everyone's mind and that this is going to continue. So next, we had 2 dark matches that did not make the DVD, just the usual students' dark matches. We had Alex Payne and Bobby Dempsey defeating Ernie Osiris and Rhett Titus. I believe this was the Ring of Honor, the debut in wrestling for I believe Alex Payne and Ernie Osiris possibly. And then we had a 4-corner survival match. Pele Primo defeated Derek Dempsey, Mitch Franklin, and Shane Hagedorn. And in another one of those classic the students get no respect. Listening to the other great Ring of Honor podcast that we plug heavily, an honorable mention. I believe they mentioned on that show, listening to the review of this, that the original stipulation for that dark 4-way for the students was the winner was supposed to get to face Kikataro tonight, and obviously the card gets shuffled around, and Pele does not get to do that. So I like that even when the students get a chance to appear on the main card, somehow it gets stolen from them. And that brings us to the show proper. We open on the DVD with after the promos with Bobby Cruz in front of the live crowd, and he's telling them that tonight's main event is a Dream Partners tag team match pitting Ring of Honor World Champion Bryan Danielson against NWA World Heavyweight Champion Christian Cage. Both men get mostly cheers, but each guy gets actually a few distinct boos from different pockets of the crowd. Cruz says each man will get to pick whoever they want off of tonight's card to be their tag team partners. And then he introduces us to our main card opening match, which is Matt Sydal defeating Jimmy Yang via pinfall in 9 minutes, 27 seconds after hitting a shooting star press. Matt, this was the first of 2 matches this weekend. This was another Ring of Honor double shot. This would be Jimmy Yang's final weekend in Ring of Honor. The fans all knew he was WWE bound, as quickly made evident by you could hear a fan shouting from the crowd at one point, velocity bound, and at Yang, and then there's a little pause, and you can hear the fan then go, ha ha, yeah, I said it, and I just thought, you're a very cool fan, obviously, very funny. But before we get to your opinion on the match, Matt, there was a little more acknowledgement of this, which this does not make the DVD. This was edited off. This is pretty funny to me, though. We'll go to the PW Torch. After his match in Long Island, New York on Friday night, Jimmy Yang told the crowd, "See you on WWE.com." That comment was not cleared ahead of time. Ring of Honor booker Gabe Sapolsky was said to be unhappy about it afterward. Quote, "It was not cleared," Gabe tells PW Torch. One Ring of Honor wrestler tells PW Torch he thought the comment was, quote, "pretty funny," unquote, and not a big deal. Quote, "I think he was just saying his goodbyes to the Long Island crowd." So, yeah, I believe that specifically the WWE.com reference was in Velocity, those C shows on the website at that point. So I guess I'm sure it was Jimmy Yang having fun with that perception that yeah, you're not going to get pushed at all. But pretty funny stuff.
Yeah, other than the yeah, I said it, ha 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 thing, the crowd wasn't so bad for this match. And the match itself was all action. There were some botches, but it was entertaining enough, I suppose. By this point, I think Yang has not cultivated super high expectations from the ROH crowd. His performances were not like a number of great matches. So even though, Seidel was on a pretty decent roll, and I was obviously liking his stuff, I think a little more than you were at this point. I don't think, when this match popped up, I was like, oh yeah, this is going to be a great one, And so I think it met my expectations. It had a little bit of, kind of an extra little spice to it because Yang was sort of working heelishly. Like he, was, like eye poking and, really targeting the arm, pretty aggressively. But like at the very beginning, he suckers Yang in with suckers Seidel in with a handshake and then goes for a kick and a forearm. The announcers never really react to Yang being a heel. Like they're never like, oh my God, how could he be doing this? They're just like, oh, Yang's being a little bit of a, jerk, whatever they say. I don't know what they say, but they're not really reacting like they're so appalled by his behavior. But that's really the only thing that makes the match a little bit unique or different from what's expected. Hits a low blow at one point too, but otherwise, they hit their big moves, moonsault to the outside, leaping enziguri to the top rope by Yang, neckbreaker off the top rope that looked pretty good. Then Seidel held on while Yang went for a top rope Rana and then hit the shooting star press and got the win. So I thought this was a solid match. I didn't really have a strong opinion about it one way or another, honestly, but I definitely didn't feel negatively about it.
I thought this was a very Jimmy Yang ROH match with, like, as you said, the exception he tried a bit of healing here. It was funny because even then you could argue, okay, he's showing more charisma, but it was like when he wasn't doing like a heel thing, he was still that kind of charisma void Jimmy Yang has been in Ring of Honor. Like between those isolated little heel spots, he was just kind of there. I think the cherry on, I think this match was like a strong average. Like it was a Jimmy Yang Ring of Honor match. I thought Seidel tried. He hit his big moonsault off the top to the floor that he often hits. Jimmy Yang did his usual stuff. The cherry, though, on top of this match was Yang threw that big spinning back kick he throws in every match, and he completely whiffed on it in this match, and actually to the point that the crowd booed him for that. And then there's that same segment that happens in seemingly every Jimmy Yang Ring of Honor match, where right in the middle he slows it down with a random submission, and I'm just kind of over Jimmy Yang. He's not actively bad, but just it was not an objectionable match, though. Next, we get full ring introductions for our next match, which is supposed to be, I guess, on paper, Delirious versus Christopher Daniels versus Colt Cabana versus Nigel McGuinness. When Christian Cage makes his way to the ring, when just Delirious, Daniels, and Cabana are in the ring, Christian comes out with no ring music or anything. He just unceremoniously walks to the ring. He gets a nice reaction, but one fan throws what I think was a roll of toilet paper. It may have been just a white streamer, but Colt wipes his butt with it. So
it was toilet paper.
Yeah, it's great.
I gotcha. I'm gonna come back to my role as toilet paper versus streamer judge, and
only if one thing we've learned from through the years is I am blind when it comes to the difference between toilet papers and streamers. Christian grabs the mic. He says it's good to be in Strong Island and it's good to be in Ring of Honor. He says he's been watching a ton of Ring of Honor DVDs, which is just that classic line that so many wrestlers who come to Ring of Honor say is a way to kind of basically say, like, don't hate me. I'm legit, folks.
Also, I bet you it's true that he's watched at least a few.
Yeah, I bet there's a lot of people I'm sure it was true for, and I bet you there were some it was decidedly not true for. Christian says he came here to talk to Colt Cabana. He has two questions for him. First, what is this Delirious guy smoking, and where can they get some? There's no wellness policy here, is there? Which technically he's not even on his third question. He's already asked three questions. But
the wellness policy joke, like, I'm not gonna like be such a prude, like we're like, oh god, that's a tasteless joke. But it is a little bit awkward because this isn't so long. Like the wellness policy was put into effect after Eddie Guerrero died, and this isn't so long after that. And the night of tribute was in this very building. I mean, I'm not saying he shouldn't have made the joke, but it's just something that made my ears perk up a little bit.
Yeah, like that seems like a lot edgier joke, no pun intended. At the time that it would. Now, even now, I think a
Yeah.
couple of people would kind of raise their eyebrows, like, "Oh, you're talking about the wellness policy," but like, yeah, back then it was a much fresher, rawer issue, so to speak. But then Christian says his second question is that after watching those Ring of Honor DVDs, the guy he was most impressed by was Colt Cabana. No offense to Colt, I want to know which DVDs he was watching.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Most impressed?
He points out that he gets to pick his own partner tonight for the Dream Tag Team match. At this point, a fan of the crowd shouts out, "Pick Gangrel!" And Christian just doesn't really have a good comeback for that. He just like calmly says, "Gangrel isn't here."
Well, but then after that, somebody keeps going, pick Edge, and it's just like, all right, well, this is another early kind of like emblematic example of why this crowd was annoying. It's like they're just like, yes, I know you from WWE. Here's the WWE stuff. I'm gonna just keep saying WWE. Like somebody said, pick Edge like 3 or 4 times during this promo, and it's like, yes. We know. Edge and Christian, they were a tag team.
Yeah, and I think it's also one of those things where this crowd was quiet enough a lot of the time that when, some other people, I mean, I'm sure a lot of wrestling crowds have that isolated, like, couple smarky fans just trying to be goofballs and get themselves over, so to speak. But, like, you don't hear them because everyone else is just reacting to matches and moments and things. Well, this was a night where, like, you often heard those comments, like the Velocity comment and this comment already, like.
Yeah, I think it's a combination. Like, I do think it's because of the quietness of the crowd. B, I think it's because there were legitimately more of those comments on this show than on other shows. Because I went to a lot of these shows. Like there was a lot of that on this show. And then C, I think it's like the mic, whatever camera mic they used was like more, I don't know, based like more in the crowd or whatever, where like you could like really pick up a lot of the individual crowd comments from individual members of the audience. On the audio of the DVD.
Yeah, I think I would agree on all 3 counts there. So Christian asks then Colt, this is his second official question, he asks Colt to be his partner tonight in the tag match against Bryan Danielson, the Dream Partners tag match. Colt takes the mic and he says, the answer to your first question, the one about what Delirious is smoking, where can they get some? He says the answer to that is Homicide, and he has the best stuff in the building, which gets a decent reaction. Colt says he doesn't know Christian from Adam, and, that funny little pun doesn't really get much of a reaction. It goes over the crowd's head. And then at this point, he introduces himself officially to Christian, saying he's a fan. Christian says he likes Colt's bandana, which was Colt was just wearing his usual, like, Cabanarama bandana that he wore in a lot of his matches and sold on his website, and I'm sure at merch tables everywhere. Colt says he made it at his house. Colt asks Christian asks if Colt can make him a bandana. Colt asks, well, what would your bandana say? Christian just says Cage, which again, like the Gangrel thing, like Christian, a clever guy. There's a couple moments like in this promo where he has a chance, like someone sets him out, like say something funny, and he just gives a very straight answer. Like Colt's just like, well, what would your bandana say? He just goes, Cage. And Colt says
his ad-libbing was not on point on this show.
Yeah, Colt says Cage-orama, and then Colt says he'll make one for Christian, but they'll have to wait till he gets back home. Colt says they have a lot in common. Their hijinks are at a high, and people probably think they go back like car seats. Colt appreciates the chance to face Bryan Danielson again, and he appreciates the kind words, and then at this point, as Colt's starting to waver, Christian interrupts him and says, like, if you're gonna say no, I'm gonna look like an idiot right now. Some fans then start chanting, just say no. Again, this was a weird crowd. So they're like, yeah, we want you to look stupid. Colt then says this would be the Jew and the Christian teaming up to conquer evil, so count him in. So Colt, again, just a few shows after starting the old Colt Cabana is just working opening matches and starting his way from the bottom. I believe this is his second out of 3 shows he has main evented since then.
But also, even if he hadn't gotten that main event, he was in a pretty marquee match with like other big stars, just on the actual scheduled card. So yeah, not really sticking to that whole preliminary thing.
I guess you would say it would have been second from the bottom on the match listings, but that was a very strangely placed second from the bottom, only to facilitate this angle.
Yeah.
At this point, we hear Bryan Danielson on the mic doing one of his classic throat clears. He stands at the entrance as the divided crowd reacts to him. Some chant, "Fuck you, Dragon." Some people chant, "Shut the fuck up," at those fans. Danielson says the crowd is stupid because they watch too much television, and he's disgusted with the ovation they gave Christian Cage when he's the one who built Ring of Honor, and he's the reason everyone is here tonight. He says it was right here in Long Island where he won the Ring of Honor World Championship, beating James Gibson. It was right here where he knocked out Christopher Daniels to retain the title. He's beaten Roderick Strong 3 times. He's beaten Marufuji. He's beaten Lance Storm. He's beaten every man they put him in the ring with, and that makes him the best champion in wrestling today. Danielson says he's also the best wrestler in the world. He's also the one who won't sell out, and he is stuck by Ring of Honor, and all you idiots applaud Christian. Danielson says he's a wrestler who sticks it to corporate America and is way too good for television. The Ring of Honor belt is better than television. It won't degrade people's minds. And if it's off to people's peripheral view, it's because Ring of Honor makes people turn their heads. A line that is so corny, it made me groan watching this. A portion of the crowd chants Dragon at this point, which Danielson calls a small portion of intelligence in a vast crowd of stupidity. Christian at this point asks if Danielson's ever going to shut up. Christian says it's unfortunate this is how they have to meet, champ. Or should I just call you John Cena with AIDS, which is like
a line that does not age well.
Also, it's like I know that the idea is, if you look like a skinnier, emaciated version of someone, people at this time, if they want to make like a edgy joke, would say you're like blank with AIDS. I'm sure I've done it a couple times when I was younger, not proudly, but like
you just walk down the street telling people that they look like so and so. Yeah, that was your thing back then.
But like John Cena. Like Bryan Danielson, you could add 60 pounds of muscle to him. He still does not look like John Cena. Like they're 2 white men, I guess, that wrestle. I don't really see a resemblance, but Christian then calls Bryan an asshole, and he makes fun of his pasty white skin, calling him Casper the Friendly Ghost. Christian says he's not going to debate which title is better, ROH or NWA's, which we should know. If that seems weird, you would say, is it Christian in TNA at this point? He is, but this was the time period where TNA's world title was not the TNA World Heavyweight title. It was the NWA World Heavyweight title. And Christian says he respects what Ring of Honor stands for, and after Danielson loses tonight, he will respect Christian. Danielson points out that he beat Christian's tag partner in 5 minutes recently, and it doesn't matter how pale he is, he can beat both of them by himself. The crowd chants, "Prove it." Danielson threatens to punch a fan. He says he doesn't have to prove anything. He says he could pick Delirious to team with him tonight, but Delirious is too crazy and weird. So instead he asks Christopher Daniels, saying that since he knocked him out, they're practically family. I don't know how that works, but that's Danielson's theory on things. Danielson, as he hears they've teamed before, but he can't remember when. He says in case Danielson can't understand because he suffered too many concussions, he's asking if he wants to be his partner tonight in the Dream Tag match. Christopher Daniels then points out that Danielson is rubbing and knocking him out and wants him to team up to face 2 guys he has no issue with, although then he then points out that he's a little hurt Christian didn't pick him because, they're both in TNA. Colt points out, I have a headband. The crowd tries to tell Daniels to reject Bryan Danielson, but Daniels says he'll make a deal. He'll be Bryan's partner tonight, but one day down the line, when they should wrestle one more time for the Ring of Honor World Championship, Bryan Danielson says, "Why? So I can just knock you out again?" But then he says, "Okay, if we win the tag match tonight, this will be a key point. I'll give you one more title shot." Danielson then calls Danielson his albino friend and says that he has a partner tonight. Christian says if Danielson was that good, he would have beaten Colt in 4 minutes, not 5, which was a funny line. Christian says they're going to win tonight for all his Ring of Honor peeps. Everyone leaves except Delirious, who remains crouched in the ring corner. Bobby Cruz says they still have one more competitor, and they're still got to have a match right here. And out comes Bobby Cruz. At this point, Bobby Cruz then says he's just been informed that this will be a one-fall 3-way match, as an on-screen graphic shows us it will be non-title, so Nigel's pure title will not be on the line. And Born to Be Wild hits, and Kikutaro comes out, so it is now a 3-way. Nigel Taxi comes down the aisle. We'll get to that match in a second. But Matt, what do you think? That was a big segment. That was more like a WWE segment, and it's almost felt like a Raw type segment where the main event is not set in stone, and we have to have this big long interview segment that kind of sets in stone, sets up the main event tonight, and everyone kind of is booking themselves. There's some humor involved. the lines from Danielson about like TV will rot your mind and I will never sell out, and then the line about like mocking Christopher Daniels for having too many concussions, like definitely things about that aged. I don't even know. I would say didn't age well. Aged just bizarrely, I would say. I mean, it was entertaining enough, this whole segment, but definitely a different kind of thing.
Well, I think the reason you hate the show so much is because you had to recap that thing in so much detail. I give you a lot of credit for that. I thought this sucked so bad. I liked it less than any of the matches on the show. It was just weird attitude era humor that doesn't age well at all. The crowd was barely reacting to it. It went on forever and ever and ever. Even Danielson, who, I've loved his 2006 promos, even that just felt very simplistic and basic and just like uninteresting, that promo. Just like, just a total like uncomplicated heel promo. Without any of like kind of the cleverness that I've usually seen in Danielson's promos. And I just thought Christian's jokes were across the board terrible and made worse by the fact that the crowd wasn't really reacting to them. And yeah, I just couldn't stand this. Like it's the exact opposite of what I watch ROH for.
Yeah. It was, I was not as negative on as you, but yeah, it was weird, and it doesn't get better from here. So we go to the three-way match, non-title. Delirious defeats Kikutaro and Nigel McGuinness in 8 minutes 15 seconds when he made Kikutaro submit to the Cobra stretch. This was a lot of comedy when Kikutaro was in the ring, sprinkled with a tiny bit of serious wrestling, usually when it was just Nigel and Delirious in the ring. But this was also one of those three-way matches where the wrestlers make hilariously little effort to try and keep everyone involved or give guys a good reason to not be involved in the match. Like, it's usually just two guys in the ring, and at a couple of moments you catch one guy literally just standing around, often outside the ring, watching the match, waiting to get back in the ring. Like, it is one of those very much just, we don't really want to work a three-way. Let's just take turns doing things we want to do, and then maybe we'll do a couple three-way spots. The match was funny enough. I think I would feel differently if I saw it more often, but like, I still get a kick out of Kikutaro's act, even though at this point it's already like I've seen basically everything he does in this match before. But, I don't see it very often, so Kikutaro's lovable. I enjoy his shtick. We get all the usual goofiness here, the slow-mo spots, he uses the Japanese ref to whip him into the corner. The ref has Delirious accidentally DDT Kikutaro. I mean, this was a decent, if you just like comedy as a wrestling match, not that good at all. I felt like a little bit of a waste of Nigel, especially on a show that probably could have used him in a more standout singles match. But you can see all the heavy lifting this match is accomplishing from a booking standpoint, in the sense that Delirious is wrestling Danielson for the world title the next night, so he probably needs a win the night before to keep him warm. If Nigel, and also the next time they go into Long Island, Delirious is going to be wrestling Nigel for the Pure title. So at the same time, you want to keep Nigel hot. You don't want him to drop the title, so you make it a non-title match. You make it so he doesn't even take the fall, but technically Delirious wins the match. But, I mean, it makes sense, but not really very satisfying, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, the other big Kikutaro match that everyone remembers is the one from the Final Showdown in May of 2005. And that one got over a lot better than this one. That had had Joe in it, wasn't Jack Evans in it too. And obviously Delirious and Kikutaro, or I guess what was he, Ebasan at the time, or Ebataro, or I don't even know.
So, Abestus Jack, there's something.
Yeah, one of those. But so like this didn't go as well as that, but it was still fun seeing Delirious and Kikutaro play the hits with their slow motion stuff and the soft chops and whatever Orange Cassidy was inspired by way back when. And obviously the storyline was then Nigel wouldn't take that shit and he would come in and try to be serious, and he actually. Even in this match, even as Nigel is, becoming more that hard-hitting Nigel, he hits the rebound lariat pretty hard on Delirious early in the match, and Delirious kicks out. So they still haven't even come close to treating that move as a killer yet. But otherwise, it was all right. It's one of those things where I think maybe if the crowd was a little better, it would have felt more enjoyable. So here's my big observation about this crowd. Like, if you remember, we did way, way, way back when we reviewed War of the Wire, and that crowd was just like silent for most of the show. And
Hmm.
this crowd was not like that. Like, there was a constant like buzz and hum in the crowd. But a lot of the noise was the random, snarky comments from people, which we'll get a few more as we go through the show. And then otherwise, like, the noise didn't really correlate or correspond with what was happening in the ring. Like, they didn't react to things that happened. Like, there was sound, but it's not like they were popping really or reacting very much. And so the crowd just seemed disengaged from the visuals, which I just thought made for just like an eerie, well, maybe not eerie, but like just like a strange feeling watching the show. Like, it just didn't compute. It didn't line up. So I think that hurt a lot of the matches, including this one. I think this was, just supposed to be like a crowd work kind of match, and the crowd wasn't really being worked. So it just felt worse than maybe it otherwise would have. So I would just describe this as just decently entertaining, but mostly very forgettable.
I think that's a really good way to put it. I especially feel like this crowd, it was one of those crowds where even when they made noise, like they never seemed passionate. Like there was never a moment on this show that I can remember where it was really like they were just, it felt like they were just being compelled to make noise. It was almost just like, yeah, they'll pop for things that they feel like it's kind of like this is a moment we should give a pop. But I never felt like they were really losing themselves in the night. But favorite moment of that match, by the way, that three-way was Nigel at one point goes, "You want some comedy?" And then he grinds his forearm on Delirious's face, and he goes, "Ho, ho, ho." And I just thought, I love that. Just him saying, "Ho, ho, ho." He's like, well, that's some comedy for
He
you.
knew we'd be reviewing this close to Christmas season.
Yeah.
So that's why he did it.
That next up, we have a Ring of Honor Tag Team Title #1 contendership match. The embassy of Alex Shelley and Jimmy Rave, escorted to the ring by Daisy Hayes and Prince Nana, defeated the Rottweilers of Homicide and Ricky Reyes, escorted to the ring by Julia Smokes, by disqualification in 19 minutes 41 seconds when Julia Smokes is caught interfering. This would be Alex Shelley's last match as a regular for this, like, the Gabe era of Ring of Honor. He would be back for a match next year as part of the Motor City Machine Guns, and then a few more in 2008. But this is it for him, and not intentional. I'm sure he probably would have been phased out very quickly shortly, but clearly winning a #1 contendership match, there was plans for at least a couple more matches from him.
He was supposed to wrestle Nigel for the Pure title the next night, but he hurt his knee here.
Yeah, in fact, we'll go to the PW Torch. Alex Shelley aggravated an old knee injury during Ring of Honor's event last Friday in Long Island, New York. Ring of Honor replaced him on the card with Jay Lethal. There's no word on whether or not Lethal will be making a permanent return to the Ring of Honor roster, but he is signed for upcoming dates with Ring of Honor sister promotion FIP, and Jay Lethal would not be making a permanent return to Ring of Honor's roster, at least not at this point, we'll say. Yeah, so for those who don't watch the match, Alex Shelley kips up, and he just grabs his knee immediately, to the point where at first I thought it was him selling.
Right, because he doesn't really, like, seem in agony the rest of the match. Like, he plays it off pretty well, but yeah, obviously it was real.
You can see him grabbing and checking it, but like, yeah, he doesn't seem that limited. But yeah, it was obviously a legit injury. His match the next night gets canceled, and this is his last match in Ring of Honor for a year. So, Matt, what'd you think about this?
So, I think this match is looked upon pretty negatively, and I went in expecting to not really like it, and it's not like it was good, but I just, all these personalities, I just enjoy so much that I was more entertained than I expected to be based on the match's reputation and what I remember. I mean, if I hadn't known anything about this match before, I'd be excited at the prospects of having Nana and Julia Smokes on the outside together. And I think that maybe one mistake in the presentation of this match is that the idea, what we talked about with the 2-camera shoot, they should have had a camera that was just focused on the seconds outside the ring, because I'm sure that they were doing a lot of entertaining stuff that we never got to see. They did get involved, like Nana would get involved more than Smokes, which would play into the finish. He would attack on the outside and stuff. He'd trip Homicide. So, Homicide basically worked this match as a babyface, even though he hadn't officially turned yet. And there is a spot in the middle of the match where Smokes and Nana get in the ring and tease that they're going to have a big fight in the middle of the ring before their guys break them up. And Daisy Hayes gets involved a bunch of times. And I think that aspect of it, if they really just wanted to go that route, they should have had people, or they should have had a camera on them and include that in the edit. I think that would have made the match more entertaining. But as far as what we did get, there's a lot of stalling, a lot of heel work, a lot of, outside the crowd stuff. Long Island, as I've noted on other shows, really does seem to take extra relish in the homophobic chants they direct at Jimmy Rave. Jimmy likes balls, Jimmy swallows, all the homophobic classics that Long Island 2000s wrestling fans love. They got it all in there. But they stall and they stall. And, it's interesting because the Rottweilers work this match like they're just toying with the embassy. Like their gimmick is that they're aggressive and threatening. And I would say they were not at all in this match. They were just like kind of taking it easy. I don't know if you noticed that too. But you still get the back and forth with Smokes and Nana. There's one point where Nana tells Smokes, "I'm not the one getting paid in food stamps." And I was just thinking, like, that seems like an illegal way for ROH to pay its performers. Doesn't seem allowed. They get so silly that at one point Homicide actually hits a double noggin knocker on Rave and Shelley, which I think is the first time we've seen the two of them do that spot in all of their silliness. So that just shows how much of a babyface Homicide was here. At one point, Homicide really just escalates things very suddenly. He hits the Tope Con Hilo on Rave, and he flies into the crowd, as he often does, and he celebrates with the crowd. And then he catches a charging Rave with a big backdrop into the crowd. And then Hayes and Smokes get into it. Now that I think about it, Hayes and Smokes would be a good team. Didn't occur
to me. It should have been together for the Vulture Squad.
Yeah, it didn't occur to me until I just said that just now. Hayes and Smokes. All right. Anyway, but they do their chop battles with Homicide and Shelley. Shelley gets an eye poke. Shelley at one point throws Homicide into a Prince Nana clothesline. Eventually things slow down. Shelley gets to be in his glory. He cuts off the ring. He knocks Reyes off the apron. And one of the weird things about this match is that they build up to a Ricky Reyes hot tag, which is, you'd think that's the opposite of what they would do, right?
Yeah.
They would think they would make Homicide the person that people are waiting for and not Ricky Reyes, since he's not that over. And so Reyes' hot tag is, as you might expect, not so hot. And the crowd wasn't so excited for the hot tag. And I don't blame the crowd for this, because when have you seen a crowd be excited for Ricky Reyes during this run? I know that sounds mean, but just factually speaking, right? Like, hasn't really
He's the
happened.
least over person in this match. And he's getting the hot tag.
That's an understatement, right?
Yeah.
But, so eventually it comes down to, after Nana's been interfering repeatedly, Reyes locks in the Dragon Sleeper on Rave, and Shelley tries to stop him. Homicide grabs Shelley, and they roll out of the ring. So Nana comes in and rakes Reyes' face to break up the hold. The referee doesn't see that. But then Rave gets his own Dragon Sleeper on Reyes, and Smokes comes in to pull him off, and the ref sees that and disqualifies the Rottweilers. So the Embassy win. So like I said, I probably like this match more than most people. I don't think it was good, but I enjoy the personalities involved. It was kind of, a little bit meandering, a lot meandering, no intensity really. But I hated the finish too, because not just for the obvious reason that it's a screwy finish, but also, as we pointed out on the show a million times, they never disqualify people in ROH unless there's a storyline reason for it. There's never, people interfere all the time in ROH in front of the referee. They use weapons all the time in front of the referee, and they don't disqualify. So to me, that makes it extra stupid when they do it in a situation like this. So that's sort of how I feel about the match.
Yeah, I'm more like, I guess, everyone else. Not that you love this match. I thought this match was kind of a mess. It never really develops any kind of flow. It's kind of disjointed. There is a bit of embassy comedy, but not as much as you want. There's a few big spots from Homicide, but it's not like you were saying, it's not really it's kind of meandering, not a big action-packed match. Although, again, Homicide did pull out those few random big spots like top rope splash. I thought he absolutely murdered Jimmy Ray with a great lariat. And that tope con hilo is one of his better tope con hilos because he actually lands on his feet with a lot of momentum. And it's one of those moments I love in wrestling where you can tell he's legitimately excited that it went so well, because as soon as he like lands on his feet, he like starts celebrating with the fans around him. And it's like, Homicide's not usually like, I'm going to like celebrate with the fans right now kind of guy, but you can tell he's just so excited, like, man, I that went really well this time. Like, it usually goes good, that went really well. And I always love that it's kind of an adorable kind of moment where when someone gets caught up in like, man, I just killed it. The match also didn't need to be 20 minutes, and then we get a very cheap finish, like you said, where we talk about this a lot, where this is one of the flaws of Ring of Honor. As much as we love the promotion at this time, if there's one of the flaws of the booking is there are definitely not a lot, but semi-frequently contrivances that are pretty clearly there only to serve the booking that otherwise make no sense. Like, why would this guy get DQ'd when interference normally gets ignored and there's very rarely DQs? And because the answer, of course, is because you need this DQ to start what we'll get to afterwards, which is the whole idea of Homicide is freaking out because he feels like he's being screwed again, and so he's going to start resenting Ring of Honor, which is going to add tension. Will he align with CZW? Blah blah blah. But it's another contrivance in the sense of, in the same way that like we were talking about earlier, like the Christian thing where he talks about like, of all the people on the Ring of Honor DVDs, Colt Cabana impressed me the most. Like, that's another big contrivance in the sense of like, he has a guy he works with in TNA that has beaten Bryan Danielson before. His name is Samoa Joe. Like, why wouldn't you pick him? Why wouldn't you pick, there are other guys you probably could have picked. Austin Aries has beaten, because the conceit of the show was Christian could pick anybody off the roster on this show tonight to be his dream partner. There are guys that have really, not the guy who just lost to him in 5 minutes, but either way. Anyway, I did think if there was one draw of this match, like you said, it was the Nana versus Smoke stuff. I wish we could have seen more. The food stamps line was fine. They were obviously like constantly or frequently at the very least like talking back and forth, and we couldn't hear so much of it. I was really disappointed by that, like you. And it made me realize, like, I wish we could have seen a Embassy Rottweilers feud with the Rottweilers as the faces back when it was like the peak of both staples, when we had Abyss with the Embassy and when you had Low Key and a more active Rocky Romero with the Rottweilers, because I think the Smokes Nana dynamic is like feels like significant here. Like, it feels more important and more entertaining than anything that goes on in the match. I think that would have been fun. You could have had like a real fun distinction between like the Embassy, which is always flaunting wealth and luxury, and the Rottweilers, which are always flying like just their street roots and their like kind of grit.
And they could have tried to lure Daisy Hayes by saying that her name just makes her make more sense with the Rottweilers.
Exactly. Like, it's funny. Like, maybe the matches wouldn't have been good, because I was going to say maybe the matches could have been good too, but this match certainly wasn't particularly good. But I feel like that could have been a fun feud. But instead, this is the end for Alex Shelley, and yeah, like I guess I will just say about Alex Shelley, like it's sad that he's kind of leaving on this note, because I felt like the Rave Shelley team has been a really fun part of Ring of Honor, and like an underrated duo. And Shelley in general, I think, is one of the more underrated guys from the first few years of Ring of Honor. Not that people didn't give him some of his due, but I just don't think he ever got quite the push he deserved, quite the respect he deserved for whatever reason.
And when he comes back for his appearances with the Motor City Machine Guns, he's a different guy, kind of, like, in that he kind of he tones down the personality aspect a lot. Certainly, he's not a heel at that point. He's sort of just like, it's like sort of like babyface matches against the Briscoes, and he's incredible, but he's much more of like a work rate guy as part of a work rate tag team. And of course he has charisma, because he always does, but this version of Alex Shelley is pretty much gone for good in terms of like, at least in terms of Ring of Honor after this.
Yeah, you could say you see a bit of his humor when he's interacting with Kevin Nash in TNA. You're seeing a bit more of that playful goofball Alex Shelley. But yeah,
although I think a lot of that was before this too.
Yeah, so yeah, maybe this is, which is sad. Although Alex Shelley is such a versatile guy, like he
Yeah,
can
yeah,
be
yeah.
that
He's
indie
great.
dream match guy,
He's great as the work rate guy too. Yeah.
but yeah, like I feel like the one opportunity they really missed with Alex Shelley was I think we rediscovered this doing the rewatching all the shows for 3 of the years is he was starting to really gain some momentum from the crowd as a baby face in the matches leading up to like Manhattan Mayhem, where he finally got to wrestle Austin Aries for the title. Like, they did that whole gimmick where like the Ring of Honor roster didn't trust him and stuff and all that. I felt like fans are starting to get behind him, and like I was like, oh, there's kind of an energy to him as a babyface now, and there's some juice to this. And then he loses to Aries, and he doesn't really go anywhere. And then eventually they put him in the embassy, and he did a great job here in the embassy, like playing up his more comedic aspects and kind of helping fill out that stable when it needed it. But it was very much a mid card role, and he never really got to. I mean, he got isolated stuff. He got that world title shot against Danielson, but like he never got really. He never got his day in the sun, I would say. But
Yeah, I mean, it's all part of the weird relationship that ROH and TNA had at the time.
so after the match, the crowd chants bullshit at the DQ finish. Homicide tells the kids in the crowd to cover their ears, which strangely like protective of Homicide. Homicide then shouts "fuck Ring of Honor." As Homicide leaves, he shouts, "I should be with CZW for real." So we're teasing now,
Maybe his own kid was in the crowd for all we know.
But yeah, this is, another classic kind of Homicide trope. The idea that Homicide from time to time feels like Ring of Honor is screwing him over. He's gotten, that heel turn in 2004 is about him feeling like he got a raw deal on like a 2 counter, something that he thought was a 3. And, we've seen this before. So they're kind of referencing that intentionally or unintentionally, the idea that Homicide can go kind of crazy and turn on everyone if he feels like he's been wronged, and he's just been wronged at this point when Ring of Honor needs him.
It'll be interesting. It'll be interesting though to look back, because I want to know if he ever does a promo where he really clearly explains why he chooses to stick with Ring of Honor. Because yeah, character-wise, he's very frustrated with Ring of Honor over and over and over and over again, and will continue to be over the next few months. So where the source of his loyalty is, I'd be curious to know how well that's explained. I don't remember it, so that's why I'm curious to see how they do it.
I'm really interested about revisiting this too. Because I fondly remember the angle, but there are little details and stuff. I wonder when we nitpick at Matt, I wonder I'm sure we will enjoy it. But we join Lacey backstage, who we see putting on a t-shirt on when we hear a voiceover immediately, like just seconds into this, say, "Cut back to the ring, cut back to the ring." We do. We see Chris Hero and Claudio Castagnoli, along with CZW referee Bryce Remsburg, jump the guardrail. They're wearing Claudio and Hero are wearing their Chikara tag team titles. They were the first Chikara tag team champions, so this was fresh, a whole fresh thing here. The crowd chants "fuck you, Hero." Chris grabs the mic. He says, "It looks like more and more people are turning their backs on Ring of Honor." The crowd chants "shut the fuck up." Hero says Homicide's a guy who has bled Ring of Honor blood since day one, and even he's jumping ship. Homicide doesn't give a damn about Ring of Honor, and neither should you. Claudio grabs the mic and he says, "Speaking of Ring of Honor, let's introduce Ring of Honor's commissioner, Jim Cornette." And at this point, Hero does like a mocking limp walk to mock Cornette's knee injury. And Claudio points out that, of course, Cornette's not here tonight. Claudio says Cornette, the man who calls Claudio a deserter, isn't here because he's a coward. Claudio says Cornette realizes Ring of Honor is a sinking ship. And Hero says Ring of Honor is a sinking ship because of him and Claudio. The kings of wrestling are here in Ring of Honor, and things are never going to be the same. At this point, BJ Whitmer and Adam Pearce run to the ring, and the match is on. It's the kings of wrestling, Chris Hero and Claudio Castagnoli, making their debut in Ring of Honor as that tag team, defeating Adam Pearce and BJ Whitmer in 14 minutes, 21 seconds, when Hero pinned Pearce after a double-team Hero's Welcome, where Claudio held the legs as Hero did the Hero's Welcome, spinning neckbreaker type move.
Did you find that the audio was just terrible for that Hero and Claudio promo? Like muffled, and like you hear random fans over Claudio. Like the audio on the show was weird, because the first half of the show, like there was like a weird like the announcers weren't coming out of both like feed, like stereo feeds, like, and it was and then it got fixed sort of in the middle. But the audio on this promo was pretty bad too.
Yeah, I forgot to mention that. That's such a great point, Matt, because there was like crackling. Like, yeah, for all the reasons you said, Matt just said, audio was really bad, like historically bad on like in some ways on the third of the show, I would say. And then it fixes itself. And I thought, well, I used to have the DVDs for these. We use downloaded rips for these because I sold off a lot of my collection before we even started doing this show. And so occasionally, you might just get a bad rip. So I thought maybe I'm crazy. But then looking at reviews of the show, listening to the honorable mention guys, like apparently this was just a DVD that had audio problems. And like, so in addition to all the other problems on the show, this just like, not since that early Ring of Honor show where Steve Corino sounded like he was doing the commentary from a phone booth or something, like has there been necessarily like this bad of like commentary audio on Ring of Honor show. Although as Matt said, it does kind of resolve itself. I don't know, maybe a third to a half of the way through the show, but at this point, still not good. So yeah, first Kings of Wrestling tag match in Ring of Honor. If you never saw Kings of Wrestling, they were one of the real better indie tag teams of their era. They were really starting to catch on.
There was also like I just want to mention something about the Kings of Wrestling because they're sort of like different eras of the Kings of Wrestling. Like in 2005 and 2006, they were like really good wrestlers, but they had like a really big like silly streak. Like they did a lot of they like one of their big like heel shticks was that they would do a lot of overly convoluted moves with like flips and like grabbing each other and like swinging over just to like do a kind of a simple move. And like they would do like this pose where they walked around on their knees. Like they would do a lot of wacky, goofy stuff. And, they were also just like super great technical wrestlers and athletic. And obviously they were Claudio Castagnoli and Chris Hero. So obviously they were really good. But then like later on in ROH, when they would get back together, they became the super serious, like badass, hard hitting, like wrestling tag team. And both eras are fondly remembered, but this is firmly in the we're going to get heel heat by being ridiculous era.
Yeah, and I would say this has worked like a tornado tag. For some reason, they don't really tell you. There's both the Ring of Honor ref and the CZW ref, so it's a two-ref match. Again, they don't really tell us why this is happening this way. And I would say this is not a bad match. This was an above-average match. I enjoyed myself, but I would say this is an example, in my opinion, of something Ring of Honor would occasionally do, which was they would book an act that was like had buzz, and then they would not put them in a position to really do what they do best, because I feel like Adam Pearce and BJ Whitmer were not the teams. I mean, not that they have a bad match, but Hero and Claudio as the Kings of Wrestling at this point, going to like the era you were talking about, like this was the one era where I was really watching Jakar regularly as well. That was like my other indie at this point, because Jakar was really doing really good stuff at this point. And, Claudio and Hero were really good as a team as like being a base to small high flyers and fast wrestlers, and also being able to do some athletic stuff, and the goofy stuff kind of fit in better in that context. And so doing kind of just like a serious, more physical brawl with Adam Pearce and BJ Whitmer, like it just feels like it's not a bad match, but it's not showcasing why these guys had so much buzz. Like I think if I hyped up to a friend, like, oh, Kings of Wrestling are one of like the hottest tag teams right now, and I showed them this match, if this was their first experience, they'd be like, I don't see why. Like it's not bad, but why are you so high on them? Because you don't really get to see it. They do some of their wacky double teams, which again seems kind of a little bit odd in the context of like a serious CZW Ring of Honor blood feud, like they do but some of their stuff, like the Kings of Wrestling, their moves were like they towed the line between ridiculous and awesome. Like to me, like stuff like where Hero will monkey flip Claudio into doing a spear in the corner on somebody else, like that's kind of ridiculous but kind of awesome too. And I was also shocked. Most of this match is just domination by the Kings of Wrestling. It's almost like a semi-squash for a lot of it. It's Hero and Claudio dominating Whitmer, and then Adam Pearce on the outside, and then he keeps trying to get in the ring, and they keep just punching him off the ring apron. And then the final few minutes, he comes in, and they trade more moves, and things heat up. The heel ref thing comes into play a few times, most notably when Bryce Remsburg jumps in to stop a sure 3 count by Todd Sinclair and incorrectly say that it was only a 2 count. Pierce really worked hard here. I thought he busted out a tope, a missile drop kick, his top rope splash. Like, this was one of those matches where Pierce is trying to hit like every big high spot flying move he can do, and he can do a few of them. Those are the three, and he can do them pretty well. And then eventually Todd Sinclair takes a bump. Necro Butcher runs in wearing a Chikara t-shirt, and he runs in to interfere for the final minute with the announcers pointing out that Necro's not even scheduled to be here tonight. He's supposed to wrestle only tomorrow night against Samoa Joe. And then the crowd chants for Samoa Joe, but he never comes out. Whitmer takes a big table bump where I believe Chris Hero puts him in a cravat as he stands on the top rope and then throws him off the top through a table at ringside. Pierce takes the loss in the ring. He loses the match. I'd say slightly above average, maybe too long on the beatdown. And again, I don't think it's like the best showcase for the Kings of Wrestling.
Yeah, I really didn't like this at all. I thought it was the worst match of the CZW feud so far. And probably my least favorite match on the show up to this point, honestly. It was just so formless. Like, it was just like, and you know, there was a point early where the crowd was starting to actually get into it. They were chanting "Let's go Whitmer," but it just went so long with the same thing over and over again. And like you said, just the, you know, beat down on Whitmer that, you know, sometimes it looked like they were just standing around figuring out what to do next. And, you know, kept knocking Pierce off the apron. And, you know, and there was even one point where BJ, when he does his comeback, he hits an exploder on Claudio, but it goes so wrong that like BJ almost can't get him up and drops him down at this terrifying angle on the back of his head and neck. And I was amazed that Claudio was okay after that. Like, it was scary looking. So even,
and I don't know whose fault it is, but you rarely see Claudio, like, he's such a professional. Like, it's rare to see him like in a move where he almost can't get over. You know, on a suplex. Yeah,
it was scary. So you add that into it, and it's just like, I don't know. I just found this match incredibly disappointing. Like, just so messy and formless that it was just like barely even entertaining. So I give this match a big thumbs down. If I was going to give this match a star rating, I would go like 1 star, 1.5. It just like I thought it was bad.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, so one of those rare examples. You disliking it much more. Not that I loved it. And the other thing we didn't even mention, Matt, this is another one of those things where things that just suit the booking. We are 2 weeks removed from a weekend that was built around, to some degree, BJ Whitmer has a broken neck and is wearing a neck brace that shouldn't even be wrestling. No mention of that here.
No mention of it, which honestly at least is more true to the way they're presenting him. So almost that's better than keep saying that he has a broken neck while doing everything he otherwise would have done.
Like, BJ Whitmer gets grabbed by the neck in a cravat and thrown by his neck through a table. No mention of it. It's now BJ Whitmer's back to just, I'm a guy who takes crazy bumps, not I'm the guy who's risking his life, which I guess is like, yeah, it's better probably for just like, you're going to have him take a crazy bump every show. Maybe you shouldn't act like he's on the verge of death because that becomes ridiculous, but yeah, just completely dropped. So after the match, Hero says they're not done when Samoa Joe's music hits, and out he marches to the ring in street clothes. The Kings of Wrestling drag Necro Butcher out of the ring as Joe enters it. They're holding him back. Necro really wants to fight Joe. They're at this point scheduled to face off the next night. Joe just stares them down from inside of the ring as the crowd chants "pussy" at Team CZW. Joe grabs the mic. He says he believes everyone in this building is calling them a bunch of pussies. Team CZW leaves, and Joe says it looks like the gynecology convention left. Which
yeah, I didn't. I mean, that's such a random line. Does that just mean like they're pussies? Is that why he's calling it a gynecology convention? Like,
which is weird because like, yeah, it's like only tangent. Also, but then it just started making me think of like, what if Necro Butcher was a gynecologist? That would be it was a bizarre mental image I started to come up with.
Okay, so what are you imagining exactly, Trevor? No, just kidding.
Dr. Butcher is here to check you for cervical polyps. But he said tomorrow they're going to have an old-fashioned fight. Joe says this to he and Necro, and it's just going to be him and Necro. Spoiler, it's not going to be. He says this is Ring of Honor, and they are professional wrestling. So it's interesting that this is the things you kind of forget and the things you learn when you do the research and read all the newsletters again and stuff. I thought this was like an odd, we'll get to the other usage of Joe, kind of an odd, minimal usage of Joe on the show. Well, according to The Observer, this was not planned because Dave Meltzer wrote in The Observer, Necro Butcher came out to lead to a beatdown until Samoa Joe did a run-in and said that Ring of Honor was all about wrestling. Joe was never advertised for the show. So this is like, I don't know if this was always planned, but like, I guess Joe was unadvertised. I guess maybe not to disappoint the fans, because what you get from Joe, if you can't show thing, oh, I'm going to see Samoa Joe do Samoa Joe stuff, you don't get a lot. But it's kind of amazing that this is the rare Ring of Honor show, I guess, at this time that Samoa Joe was not advertised for.
Yeah, it's interesting because, they talk like they kind of booked Long Island as like the TNA town, like where they would try to play to their TNA fandom. So you'd think that they would highlight Joe in Long Island because he was a big star in TNA at this time, but no, I guess not. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, if you look at the show too, like this is a show where it's very much a B show, where in terms of a draw, like Christian just being in Ring of Honor is like the only selling point. Like, yes, the Briscoes versus Aries and Strong in singles matches is intriguing, but I don't think those are the kind of matches that are getting a ton of fans to buy tickets on their own. They're kind of the matches you're happy to have on the card when there's a big match drawing you. It's like Christian really and not even a singles match, just like a tag match where the participants aren't announced other than it's going to be Danielson on one side, Christian on the other. Like, this is a pretty thin card other than that. Right down to no announced Joe. But then
I would say so, yes. This is a thin card. I would agree.
We then get an ad for Ring of Honor's usual merch website, and then we go to Delirious backstage. He's sitting down wearing a hoodie. He cuts a promo in Delirious gibberish where occasionally you can make out a word like Danielson. He's angry. We can tell that. This is,
I think as he gets more pushed, his promos are very slightly less gibberish heavy. Like, still gibberish, but he makes it so you can make out words. Whereas I think in some of his earlier promos, it was just like complete nonsense.
It's like occasionally I've seen like comic books or things like where they try and do like how a dog hears. I think there was a comic book that did this, and it would be like when they would see the word bubbles of the humans, almost every word would be like gibberish except for the words they would recognize, like food or walk or stuff like that. And I feel like Delirious cuts his promos like that. Like he just, especially like you said, as he goes forward, he will sprinkle in just enough words you can understand so you kind of get a taste of what he's intending you to think. Where, anyway, Delirious is angry. He ends by saying Ring of Honor World Heavyweight Champion. So we get, he's cutting a promo. He's going to face Danielson tomorrow night. So after the intermission, we get Samoa Joe defeating Apocalypse via pinfall in 6 minutes, 29 seconds after he hit the Muscle Buster. This was one of those squashes that was taped for ROHvideos.com that also makes
I find it so funny. I find it's like this is like they're going to put this on ROH videos to accomplish what exactly, but okay.
Yeah, like do fans need an introduction to Samoa Joe? And is this like a better introduction than just giving away like a classic old Samoa Joe match for maybe a DVD you've sold already a lot of, like if you're worried about cannibalizing your DVD sales? But so in case people haven't heard, Apocalypse, Victor from the Ascension in WWE, he had done a few dark matches in Ring of Honor, a couple at least before then. This is his first proper match on, I believe, on a show that made the DVD. I was wondering, like, looking at his cage, I was like, oh, why do you like work like a month in Ring of Honor in the Indies and then disappear? And back to Canada, Stampede Wrestling, he was an Alberta wrestler. And then listening to Honorable Mention, they explained that this was Apocalypse did something that I guess I've heard of a few wrestlers over the years have done, which was you're trying to break into the northeast Indies, that hot scene at the time. You would like stay somewhere for like a month and work a bunch of shows and hope you catch on. And I believe they said that he was actually staying with Bryan Danielson for a month, and this was during that period. So
well, that would help. That would help get you in the door.
Yeah. So so he he's working for Ring of Honor for this month, and then he just disappears, and then he kind of is back to Canada until it's time for WWE to come calling. But this was like all the matches taped for there. It's basically a short squash. And Joe gives him a bit, but most of this match is pretty nondescript with a pretty middling pace. Apocalypse shows off a little agility, including a nice spinning kick that catches Joe right in the head. Joe hits a few of his usual trademark moves. But the real highlight of this match is Joe telling an overzealous fan that's chanting for Joe to kill Apocalypse to calm down. And then later on in the match, I liked Joe hits his senton to Apocalypse, but he catches like Apocalypse low, and Apocalypse, thinking on his feet, sells his dick. And Lenny says diplomatically that Apocalypse took the move to, let's just say, his upper thigh region. So I also liked in the commentary at one point Lenny says Apocalypse is a talented wrestler from Calgary, but he outright also like says he's not the caliber Joe usually faces. So this was basically just sold as like this is a tune-up match for Joe. But what do you think about it?
Yeah, they say it's an extra tune-up because Prazak said that Apocalypse kind of looks like Necro Butcher, which I don't know if I agree with. They both have beards and long hair, but I mean, I almost think like they were being very generous to Apocalypse here by giving him as much as they did. This should have been even more of a squash than it was based on their standings. And it's not like Apocalypse was doing anything so interesting. In fact, at one point he even slows things down into a chin lock, which I was like, in a short ROH match against Samoa Joe, wouldn't you be trying to impress and not do a chin lock? And I get the ideas, like in some of these matches, you do a chin lock because it gets the crowd behind the babyface. And it sort of worked for like a split second here, and then the crowd is just so lethargic that they stop their clap early, and Joe has to like bang the mat to get them to start clapping again. And it's like I want it to be like, oh my god, he tapped out because he was banging the mat to get them to start clapping again. But it was just like, oy, Long Island, what are we gonna do with you? And then you mentioned the senton spot. Part of the reason that Joe hit it low was because Joe always does the move where he hits the atomic drop, the big kick, the senton. But after the big kick, I guess Apocalypse didn't realize, and he started like rolling away. And Joe was just like, all right, I'm just going to chase this guy and hit my senton however I can. And so Apocalypse wasn't like in the appropriate position to take the senton. And that's why it went awry the way it did. But yeah, this was pretty boring.
I am so glad you mentioned that too, that Joe tapping the mic, because I forgot to make a note of that in my notes, but I thought that was really noble too, because I always feel so bad for wrestlers when they do it was more acceptable and more normal in the old days of wrestling, but like in modern wrestling when wrestlers do the crowd isn't giving me enough of a reaction, so I'm going to start slapping the mat, which is basically me telling the fans like, could you start clapping for me? It's like Joe almost never has to do that, and to see him do that, I was like, man, this is just that kind of show where even Joe is like, come on, guys, can you give me something here?
You know who's good? Who's really good about that is Allison Danger. She does a really good job in Daniel's corner of getting the crowds to start their little claps.
Yeah, and that's good too, because it's more acceptable for a manager, right? Like a manager should be trying to rile up the crowd and being like, come on, help out my guy, as opposed to when the wrestler themselves does it. It's almost like, I don't know, if you're my wingman and we're trying to like impress a couple girls on a double date, I want you to compliment me, Matt. I don't want to compliment myself. That's going to make me look egotistical.
Should you not use me in that role, Trevor? I feel like there are some like famous wrestlers that would do better in that situation than me.
Oh, God. That is a reference for hopefully one other person might get what that reference is. Anyway, Mark Briscoe defeats Roderick Strong via pinfall in 15 minutes, 49 seconds after he hit the cutthroat driver. So this is the first of our two Briscoes versus Aries and Strong singles matches, setting up that the next night we're getting the tag title match between the two teams. Matt, what do you think of this? Is our third from the top match.
So this is another match that I think is remembered by anybody who remembers it as being remarkably unentertaining and disappointing. And I wouldn't go that far. I think as far as a wrestling match, this was the best match of the show so far, but like it didn't live up to what it could have. I think it started out really well. Like I think like there was just like really solid wrestling. And I just think like it lost the plot throughout. Like besides, I think the crowd wasn't really reacting well, but I think they didn't have a good story to tell. It was just sort of like they were hitting each other hard. They kind of slowed down at different points. There were some good moves done, but it didn't really seem to have much of a flow. And I actually, and I think it was, mainly done to get over that Mark was able to beat Jay. I mean, Mark was able to beat Roderick, which, plays into the fact that they have a tag title shot the next night. But, like they have some good stuff throughout. Like besides the early stuff, we have Mark missing the shooting star press and Roderick hitting the sick kick and then he goes for a really deep stronghold. And I was actually, Mark made the ropes, like, and, at watching the match live, that was pretty surprising. I didn't expect that. And then Mark winning with the cutthroat driver for the clean win, I thought was a pretty good finish, but it just sort of, I don't know, it trailed off it through too much throughout the match. So I thought it started well. I thought it ended well, but I thought the middle of the match was fairly dull, especially compared to what I would have expected from these two. Roderick did hit very, very, very hard in this match, though. He did live up to his reputation for that.
This felt like a match we saw a lot more of in 2005 Ring of Honor, where we got to it feels like we're seeing this less in 2006, where it's a match that looks like on paper like it should be pretty damn good and it gets quite an amount of time, but in reality it's just kind of decent. Like I would agree. I think we're right simpatico on the quality of this match. Like I would say this is a low good and the best match on the show so far, while still being disappointing. But it's one of those matches where there's not a lot wrong with it. There's just not a lot right to it. I guess I would say there's wrong to it in the sense of it just doesn't really have an urgency.
It's just kind of dull.
It doesn't have a lot of story or emotion. The final few minutes they do uncork some big moves, and the quiet crowd gets a little bit into it. But even something, it's one of those matches where things just seem missing.
I do think this is a match where if the crowd was a little better, this match would be a little better.
Oh, I thought like the things that I stood out to me aren't like good parts of the match. Like the fact that Roderick Strong's nose gets busted open and he gets the Charlie Chaplin, Adolf Hitler, Michael Jordan weird commercial face where like he has the mustache of blood just over. Like, and I realized the weird thing is like we are one member of Generation Next from like every member of Generation Next getting their nose busted open in like the last 5 or 6 Ring of Honor shows we've watched, because
I feel like this is like, I got to go back and check, but I feel like this might be like 7 or 8 consecutive shows where somebody gets their nose busted.
Yeah, because we had during the big triple shot weekend, it was like consecutive shows where Seidel breaks his nose and then Austin Aries gets his nose badly busted up, and now we're just a few shows later, and now it's Roderick getting it. So like if Jack Evans, whenever he makes his return, like gets his nose bloodied, that's like a secret crazy Ring of Honor thing that no one knows about, but I'm sure it won't be, but that would be weird if like all of there's just some kind of like Final Destination, but for nosebleeds in wrestling, where it just they have to get them all. But so yeah, that was like the notable thing. And, here's the other notable part of this match to me, Matt. At one point on the floor, Roderick Strong whips Mark into the barricade, and a fan's like not expecting that, and he's holding like a beer that's pretty full, and he spills the beer all over himself. And Roderick seems like so apologetic, and he like fist bumps the guy. Like he was like, "Man, I'm sorry, man." I mean, but the guy's like laughing, he's like taking it well. But I've rarely seen a wrestler like in that moment be like, seemingly as an apology, almost to the point where I was like, does Roderick know this guy? Because he seems kind of bummed that he just cost this guy like half a beer. But,
I think maybe Roderick, again, I don't know him, seems like, especially in this era, may have been the type of guy that really took seriously somebody being able to have their entire beer.
Also good was after the match, you can see Green Lantern fan giving Roderick a roll of toilet paper to clean his bloody nose with.
Yes, that was sweet. But I will say this. As far as the crowd, this is when the crowd, like live, was really starting to piss me off. You can't really hear it on the DVD as much, but during these matches, like the Briscoes matches, you were getting a lot of like random obnoxious crowd chants. Like I remember like someone was chanting for like Gold Dust and like stuff. It's just like stuff that had nothing to do with what was going on. Like you even heard some boring chants. Just the sort of stuff that you don't typically get at ROH shows. And, there's a lot of indicators that this was not a typical ROH crowd other than the usuals in the front row. And that was one of them.
Yeah, this is very much a crowd like the Gangrel stuff. It's felt like just like a references crowd, which whatever people didn't like about Ring of Honor crowds, usually Ring of Honor crowds, even at their worst, weren't that kind of crowd that was just like, I'm going to shout, hey, remember that thing you did? Like, at least not like so, like,
I mean,
without any like jokes to it
the
or
worst of an indie crowd, like of just somebody like, oh, wrestling's in town. Let me
yeah,
go and talk about the famous wrestling while I watch the not famous wrestling. You know?
yeah. So next we go backstage to the Lacey promo that was interrupted earlier. Lacey says Jimmy Jacobs really impressed her at the last show. Jimmy won just like Lacey asked him to do, and she sees potential in him, and that's why this weekend she sent him off for some extra training, so he's not working this weekend. Lacey points out, though, that means no one's here to tell her how great she looks in this skimpy new outfit she's wearing. Lacey says if Jimmy keeps pulling out wins like the one he had the last show he worked, you never can tell what's going to happen. So at this point, we're just continuing this vague story. Like, we're in this weird middle ground of the Jimmy Loves Lacey storyline where, like, definitely started off hot once they like lucked into the great Jimmy Jacobs like music video and that concept caught on, and we'll get into like more meat of it later. But right now we're just in this weird middle ground where like the whole storyline seems to be Lacey keeps saying like, if you do well, I'll get naked in front of the world, like. Which is just, I don't know. This is for someone that, like, the story, like, before her character's always been, like, how she's very judgmental towards men, you know, often rightfully so, and, like, how they're all disgusting. Like, the idea, like, oh, I'm going to get naked for everyone if you just keep winning these mid-card matches, like, doesn't quite seem, like, cohesive for her character, but...
I think the idea is she's still trying to manipulate him,
Yeah.
But, you know, I think there's not really a lot of advancement in this storyline for a while at this point.
Yeah, we're kind of in a holding pattern. That brings us to the semi-main event. Jay Briscoe defeated Austin Aries via submission in 18 minutes, 16 seconds when he made Aries quit using the Cobra Clutch, or as Lenny Leonard always would call it, the Shinanamaki. This was easily the best match on the show up to this point, and I'll tip my hand a little bit and say this. In my opinion, this was the best match of the night. I put this on the board between good and very good, like 3.5 to 3 3/4 stars. It's not a match that you need to go out of your way to see, or it's not even that super memorable. But like on this show, I will take a match this good. The first reason this match I thought was that good was it had what the previous match was missing, which was intensity. Like, before the match even starts, Aries is taunting Jay, like, being like, you're never going to get closer to the tag title than this, you know, all this stuff. They're just jaw-jacking. There's palpable anger between the two. You know, Jay Briscoe's paintbrushing the back of Aries' head. You know, like, they're doing what you should do when you're trying to build up a feud, which is they're just doing those little extra touches to show, like, hey, we dislike each other. And as the match gets more into the moves, they kind of lose some of that intensity, but they still give you enough of it at the start that I appreciated that. They lay it in a fair bit. Like, Jay has some pretty big welts on his back from early on. Eventually, Jay starts working on Aries' shoulder. And then we get to the other thing that I thought made this match gave it a little more zest, which was he does a whole host of like inventive offense targeted on Aries' shoulder that you usually don't see from Jay Briscoe. Like, Jay suplexes Aries while he holds onto a hammerlock. He does a spinning toe hold, but he does it like on the arm instead of the leg. He does like a TKO, but instead of landing in a cutter, he like lands where he's hurting Aries' shoulder. He does a Falcon Arrow, but he does it like over his knee, where Aries' shoulder like lands over his knee. Like, all this neat, like, just unique stuff he's doing just for this match, just for this story. And this match is not a classic or anything, but I guess what I want to say about this match is, a lot of times when we complain, or I guess when I complain about a match on Through the Years, a lot of times my complaint will be like, oh, this didn't reach my expectations, like they just didn't go hard enough or something. And I feel guilty because I don't feel like every match in wrestling needs to be like a balls to the wall, your main event level match, especially when it's not in that spot on the card. But what I liked about this match is it kind of reminded me of like, you don't like this match, like there's a good amount of action on this match, but it was probably not the level of intensity and the level of kickouts and big moves they would have had if it was the main event or on a big show or something. But they didn't need to, because they did things, you know, like the selling and like the intensity and, you know, the shoulder storyline, that inventive offense where like, it made me feel better about myself. It reminded me like, oh, you don't need to have like a crazy balls to the wall match in every moment to make me happy. It's just like, make the effort to do like the simple little things that make a match a little more unique and stand out a bit and feel like you're a little more in the moment on whatever night you're working. And yeah, again, this match was not amazing, but more than anything on the show, it made the effort to kind of feel like, oh, you're really caring tonight, you know, on a very much a B show.
don't you think that if this match had a really hot crowd, this would be a low-level great match? Like
It could have been. This is a match where, you know, yeah, you notice more that, oh, they're finally getting something here, and they're still not giving it a ton.
Yeah, I mean, they give it a little bit more, and I agree with you about the intensity at the beginning. In fact, even like I noticed the lockup that they did at the beginning. Like I was like, oh, their wrestling school trainers must be really proud because they gave this like stiff, like just really solid lockup that just demonstrated the friction between them. And then, like you said, the Jay smacking Aries in the back of the head while he was in the hammerlock, all that stuff was great. The one negative thing I might say, and it's certainly nothing to do with them. But I think vibe-wise, this was similar enough to the match before it that I almost wonder if it would have been better if they spread the two of them out, like had one of them in the first half, one of them in the second. But I guess what they were going for was the first half was like the variety hour, and then the second half was the wrestling part of the show.
Mm-hmm.
So I get, but I don't know. Do you think there would have been any benefit in splitting these two matches apart from each other in the lineup?
Yeah, I mean, this might have been a better opener. The Roderick Strong, Mark Briscoe match might have worked better as an opener, maybe, especially when the crowd hasn't seen a lot. I still don't think it would have been a great match, but yeah, I guess they just probably wanted to like really send the message here of like, oh, you know, you'd think the Briscoes are tag team specialists, so they're gonna, you know, lose to Aries and Strong going into their tag match in the singles matches. But guess what? We're flipping the script, and they're both winning in singles completely clean. You know.
Yeah, right. It hammers it home when it happens two in a row.
Maybe they think if it happens two in a row, yeah, that it makes it more of a. Maybe they even figured that like, oh, if you had just seen Mark beat Roddy, you definitely think Aries is going to beat Jay. Instead, Jay not only beats Aries, he makes him submit.
Yeah,
you know?
which is definitely rare. And yeah, I mean, there are parts where the crowd comes alive. Like actually, they come alive for Aries' slow-mo replay knee drop. So that spot is definitely over at this point. But yeah, like not only is Briscoe's shoulder work against Aries inventive, it's also very well targeted. It's very believable. You know, it adds a good storyline to the match that the first of these two matches was lacking. And, you know, everything is just well done. Like there's just really no mistakes. The fight over the brain buster, and then Jay turns it into a shoulder breaker. I really like that. You know, I like how Aries would pause between moves to sell the shoulder. I think Briscoe's shoulder work was good, and I think Aries' shoulder selling was good. And I think, you know, that all built up to a great finish. So yeah, I think this was a really good match that was just, you know, had a subdued crowd. So I don't think you got the full experience of what it could have been, but I think they did a really good job of telling a simple story and working it well. Just two really solid wrestlers wrestling a super solid match. And I agree with you. This was the best match of the show, like period.
Couple other little quick notes I have just looking at my notes. Another goofy moment I liked. I mean, I had to look for my pleasure somewhere on this night, Matt. So at one point early on, Jay walks to the cameraman during his entrance, and he like bumps into the cameraman, and you can apologetically just hear Jay be like, "Oh shit!" I was just like, again, I love the rest. This was a night of wrestlers being like very apologetic as they interact with the real world, or as close to the real world as you get on an indie wrestling show. And then I also want to just give a shout out to Austin Aries, because I've tried to do this one other time before, but I feel like Austin Aries is a guy. I did not appreciate this era of Austin Aries enough at the time, where I kind of thought Austin Aries was a little overrated. I remember when I was watching Ring of Honor at the time, not that I didn't enjoy a bunch of his work, but on a show like this, I really appreciate that, like, he is so consistent in this era, where I feel like, you know, we're getting to in this point we've talked about recently, where some guys, particularly some of the TNA guys, they're taking, you know, an occasional night half off, or with a lot of these more frequent double shots, we're seeing guys kind of, and it's not like Aries is going actually absolutely 100% here, but I feel like I can't remember the last time I've seen an Aries match where I did not feel like he was trying and giving like a really good effort for your money and pulling out a lot of his big stuff. And even just, he's always, even in this match, he's like talking to the crowd and really trying to engage them. He's always doing that. And I just felt like Aries is one of the more consistently, like, just consistent workers. I would feel like of this era, like late 2005, early 2006. I feel you can always, even if he's not always hitting the absolute highs of the matches we're absolutely going most insane about on these shows, like he's always giving you a really consistent effort.
He's learned from Jack Evans's 2004-2005 work how to always be entertaining at every moment.
Yeah, definitely. And that brings us to the main event. Your dream tag team match. Christian Cage and Colt Cabana defeat Bryan Danielson and Christopher Daniels in 28 minutes, 25 seconds when Cage pins Daniels after he hits an unprettier. So yeah, I guess I should also give a little more details. The finish is Christian has Daniels pinned after the unprettier, and Bryan Danielson's on the apron. He has the time. He could break up the pin, and we see him. He makes a very good acting job. It's clear what he's doing. He sees Daniels that he could break up the pin, and then he decides, screw it, and he just walks away and lets Daniels take the fall and lose. And it's up to you to decide, is Danielson like just a general coward, frustrated with how the match is going, or is the idea really like, is he terrified that because remember, the stip of this match was if Danielson's team won, he has to give Daniels another shot at the title. So he just realizes half an hour into the match, well, if I lose this match, I don't really have to do that. I mean, that is kind of, I guess that could be the logic. But either way, it kind of builds for a Daniels-Danielson rematch that we never get in Ring of Honor.
Yeah,
so,
and that's an important point because apparently they do have a match like for the ROH title outside of Ring of Honor in the not too distant future from this. So, but yes, there's never another one in ROH.
So, Matt, this was the match that was the draw of the show, the dream match. It was the match I would argue at this point in the show is kind of in the position where it needs to kind of save the show. It needs to be a real home run. I guess before we tipped our hand, but I think it's safe to say you probably do not think this was an absolute home run.
No. So first of all, if you have a match that's going to go 30 minutes, like at this point in my life, my feeling is it's got to be one of two things. One, if it's going to be 30 minutes, it's got to be fucking awesome. Or it's got to have like a really good story to it that makes the length make sense. I don't know. Do you agree with that? Like, are you cool with just like pretty okay, unmemorable matches that go 30 minutes or more?
A match has to justify the time. Like, I think I made this analogy like along the classic Trevor Dame wrestling food analogies. I made this years ago on the show. I think I said something to the effect of it's like mashed potatoes. So like if something's average or just decent or kind of bland and there's just a little bit of it, that's fine. And sometimes it can pad out a show. But like you don't want to eat just a plate of mashed potatoes with not even salt and pepper on it, like nothing but that. It's like if something's average, it better not be longer than like 10 to 12 minutes.
Exactly.
Because, yeah.
And I wouldn't say this is like average. Like I think it's pretty good, but like it's just like they're not going for the gold here. It's a house show match. I guess I just don't really understand why it has to be so long. Like one compliment I will give, like, and this is just a general ROH compliment. That's something that I enjoyed about ROH back then. Is one way it differentiated itself from pretty much every other American promotion at the time. In WWF in the Attitude Era really shifted the focus to where like entrances became like the most important part of the show, especially during the Attitude Era. But it continued to be that way, even all the way to today, I would say. Entrances are a big, big deal. And even in ROH, they were important. But what WWE would always do is whenever there would be a tag team match between two singles with two single stars, they would give each person their own entrance and just like make the entrances take a long time. I like that ROH differentiated itself by if there was going to be a tag team, they would come out together, even if it meant that one of the wrestlers didn't get to have their entrance music played. And, it's a little thing, but I appreciate that because I think it just shows like, okay, this is a wrestling company. The match is what's important. Yes, it's okay if we sacrifice an entrance from time to time. It's, again, a very minor thing, but it's something that I appreciate about ROH in this era is that they do that. But as far as the match, yeah, they do the thing where Danielson teases that he's afraid of Christian, so he doesn't, get in the ring with him much. Like in fact, they also do a thing where Christian and Daniels are going to start, but then for some reason I couldn't even figure out why. Christian immediately tagged out, and it was actually Cabana that started against Daniels. And then they do this whole thing where Daniels, like, he does a forward roll, and then he looks at Christian, he's like, "That's how I roll," and everybody pops, and I think I popped too at the time because, I love puns, Trevor.
Justin Shapiro, this is the Ring of Honor show you should have forced him to go to.
Yes. But then they really just go over the top with it. Everyone's rolling, everyone's saying, "That's how I roll." Even Christian does it. He's like, "That's how I roll." It's like, well, that was, they're doing this for your benefit, Christian. And we even get a holy shit chant for the rolling. And this is the one time that I appreciate the assholes in the crowd, because there's one guy that keeps yelling, "Please wrestle."
I remember that guy. And you know what? It was funny because, like, he didn't even sound snarky. I'm sure he was, but, like, he sounded like he was, like, legit annoyed. Like, he was like, "Come on."
Yeah.
He was so angry.
Yeah.
I felt so bad for that guy.
In fact, he was actually, at certain points, he was, like, addressing Colt directly. He's like, "Colt, please wrestle." But so Danielson eventually comes in, after Jimmy Bauer gets on the mic briefly to promote Straight Shooting with Christian Cage. But Danielson tags himself in by touching the top of Daniels' head, which was kind of a funny way to do it. But then Danielson does kind of get focused. He gets on the mat. They do like a monkey flip sequence, Danielson and Colt does, but Danielson like keeps turning them into like arm bars and leg locks and triangles. So it's not just like wacky flippy doos. And eventually Danielson asks for Christian, and Cabana tags him in after about 8 minutes, but then Danielson tags out quickly, like I said, showing that he's, a little bit of that heel cowardice, and the crowd, of course, enjoys telling Danielson that he's a pussy. So at least they're reacting to something that's going on in the ring between the rolling and the Danielson leaving the ring. But no one has an advantage. It's over 10 minutes in. It's just back and forth, like I said, house show, stally type stuff. And eventually they start working over Christian's neck, but that doesn't really last that long. Colt comes in, and Danielson gets aggressive with him, knees, forearms. Daniels comes in, Colt tries to hit the ropes, but Danielson pulls it open, causing Colt to fall to the floor, and Danielson throws him into the guardrails a bunch of times, and then finally we get the control segment with Daniels and Danielson getting heat on Cabana for a while. And they do the quick tags and cutting off the ring, but they show that they're like not really a smooth tag team because they argue with each other. Danielson's working the leg, and then when Daniels isn't doing that, Danielson yells at him to do it. So they definitely focus a lot on the tension between those two. But eventually they're working on Colt for a while. And Danielson does some like cool variations of the Indian Deathlock, briefly even turns it into the side elbows to the head kind of thing. And the hot tag is super weird here because like it's not really done super dramatically. It's like Danielson is just sort of standing between Colt and Christian, and Cabana just sort of like does like a side roll like he's like in a football game or something. And kind of like does a spin around Danielson and tags in Christian, and the crowd's just not ready for it. So like there's really no pop, but Christian does treat it like a hot tag, and he does a spear. Daniels breaks it up. They eventually have Cabana and Daniels out to the floor with Cabana hitting an acai moonsault, which seems hard to do on a bad leg. So he's not selling quite as well as Aries was in the match before. But, they do their whole, trading big move sequence, on the, Christian goes for the unprettier, which is the kill switch now, right? I'm not wrong about that, right? That is not the unprettier. So. That's not the unprettier anymore, yes. Danielson turns that into a cattle mutilation, which is a pretty logical counter if you think about it, considering the way those moves are set up. So I'm glad they did that. And then, Cabana breaks that up. Christian hits that inverted DDT. Daniels distracts him. And then Danielson crotches Christian and hits the big superplex off the top rope, which Christian kicks out of. And Danielson gets in the chicken wing, and Daniel stops Cabana from breaking that up and locks in the Koji clutch, so they have kind of simultaneous submissions on, but Christian makes the bottom rope. So then Christian at one point kicks out of the best moonsault ever, and Cabana comes in and kind of goads Danielson into accidentally roaring elbowing Daniels, and then that allows Christian to hit a frog splash. Daniels kicks out of that, and then Christian goes for the unprettier, but Daniels hits him with a missile drop kick. Cabana hits the flying asshole, but then Danielson sends him to the floor, and then Christian clotheslines Danielson to the floor, and that leaves him and Daniels alone. Daniels goes for the Angel's Wings. Christian blocks it, hits the unprettier very suddenly, pins Daniels as Danielson, like you said, waved off making the save. So, they do the hot finishing sequence, and it's pretty entertaining, but the match is just too long for what it was. If they had done like 10 minutes and then got to that finishing sequence, I would have been like, okay, this was a pretty nice little match. But as it was, it just felt like it went on and on and on and on and on. And I didn't think that the finish was so good that it was worth all that. So I still think, they're all talented wrestlers. So this was a fairly good match, but, maybe 3 stars at most, which, when you're watching a 30-minute main event with Bryan Danielson, that's not good enough for me. So I'd say this did not save the show.
Yeah, I literally look at my notes, Matt. Your last few sentences are almost word for word my notes. Very slight differences. This is my first few words of my review. This did not save the show. At best, I'd say it's a fairly strong good, like a 3.25 star match. So yeah, we were. I was very slightly higher. And the sad thing is, we're both like kind of. Yeah, it was good, but meh on this match. I would say this is still the second best match on the show.
Yeah, I know it is second best.
Which is kind of a bad sign. It's like, this kind of okay but way too long match is like the second best thing we saw.
Right, like if this is like 3 stars, and then the Aries versus Briscoe match was like either 3.5 or 3.75, and then the Briscoe versus Strong match was like 2.75, and those are those are the big 3 on this show.
Yeah. So one of my problems with this match would be so when a big star from another promotion, especially like in the indie world or the Ring of Honor world, from like a major promotion comes to Ring of Honor for a one-off or a guest appearance or two, you typically I feel like you have an expectation where you want them to feel like a big star. If anything, you sometimes the mistake that happens more often than not is the outside star goes overboard and gets overly well presented, to the point where they kind of overshadow everyone else and it looks like, oh, no one else in the home promotions even in my league, and I'm big timing them. That doesn't really happen here. Instead, I feel like the problem's like the rarer, almost opposite problem, where this is a match where like Christian feels like a supporting player in a match that should be all about him. Like, I feel like he's the least impressive. I mean, he doesn't tag in until 8 minutes in. They do the thing, as you mentioned, where they do the typical story where Danielson teases wrestling Christian, but he doesn't want to until he has the advantage. And they do have a couple of extended sequences together, which are pretty good, but not amazing sequences. And Christian, gets the fall in the end. But so much of this match is Cabana being the face in peril. And I felt like the focus of this match really was building up more Danielson feuds. It was Danielson's tension with his own partner Daniels, and which was directly at the end, the finish, and happened. They, like you mentioned, they were showing tension during the match and just kind of building up Cabana for another Danielson title match. And it just felt like Christian just happened to be like the free agent that was slotted into that role. I don't feel like you got enough Christian for the money. He was not in it like only 2 seconds, but I felt for a 28-minute match on a show that's built around Christian, you could have had more Christian in this match. I have some reporting about why that was probably the reason.
Yeah, he was also clearly not there to be like, I'm going to prove to these ROH fans that I got what it takes to be an ROH superstar. He wasn't there with something to prove. He was there to have a entertaining little thingy.
Yeah, it's something I've talked about before, where I felt like a lot of Ring of Honor like super legend superstar wrestlers, they fall into two categories of they're the wrestlers who give like the B plus performance where it's pretty good, but you can tell they're not going all out, but they're doing enough. And to me, that might be like the Great Muta, or like the best version of that might be Jushin Liger, where that'd be like a B plus performance. And then there's like the Kenta Kobashi Dragon Gate guys, where they're giving you 95, 90, 100%, just going all out. I felt like Christian, this was definitely a B performance, maybe even a B minus performance, where he's not mailing it in, but yeah, like you were saying, you do not get the impression here that he's really dying the way some wrestlers are. Like, I want that indie cred. I really want to prove it, like one of the most, critical crowds in the world that's kind of seen by the tastemakers. Like, this is what I am when the shackles of sports entertainment, as Gabe Sapolsky would love to say, are taken off. This feels like, no, like, I'm here. This is another weekend for me. I'm going to do enough to entertain you.
And I think that brought down everybody else too, because I think if Christian came in there and was like, I want to have the best match in my life, right? Not that I'm saying he needed to do that. I'm not like criticizing him or anything, but like if he did that, if he came in like, I just want to have an incredible, like if like it was Kobashi, where it's like, I want to have the perfect match. I think that Danielson and Daniels would have been game. Like they would have been like, all right, let's put together an incredible match. But since Christian was in there just being like, yeah, let's just have a nice match to entertain the people. I think that Danielson and Daniels were both like, yeah, that's fine. Let's do that.
Yeah, and by the way, I just want to make clear, I'm not saying like Christian's wrong for giving that
exactly.
level.
I'm not saying it's bad that he did that at all.
But as a fan, I can only judge the matches I'm given, and I have to be honest and tell you that it's a B minus performance and a B minus match. It's probably not the smartest for guys like Kenta Kobashi to like probably take months off his career working his butt off for less than like 800 people, in New York. But I sure appreciated it,
I might argue with that. I mean, we don't have to get into the whole Kobashi thing, but like, I think it probably was good for his legacy that he did that. And I don't know if it really changed the course of his career all that much one way or the other.
Yeah. But, yeah, I also thought like while Christian was not bad in this match, again, I don't want to seem like I'm beating up on Christian. I also really noticed that like, and I don't know, we'll get to it in just a second, but like I don't know how much of this is Christian holding back, or how much of this I kind of got this feeling like when he really did have the floor, even when he was working and kind of controlling the match, I felt like part of me had this thought of like, oh, this is why Christian is what he is, which is like this really good mid-card, upper mid-card guy that can occasionally be in main events, but he's just missing that little extra side. Like I felt like when you watch Danielson in this match, when he's in control, he has that real look at me authority. Like he grabs your attention and he wrestles with that extra layer of confidence. Like when he's, doing his usual for this era Danielson stick, it's dripping with confidence. Like you're looking at me, I'm controlling this match. When Christian's doing his stuff, he doesn't really have that same kind of like, you can't take your eye off of him. He's really dictating everything. This match revolves around him. He just seems like, no, it's Christian's time to do some stuff. And he does it pretty well, but in this match, I think if you watch this match, you will see the difference between a Bryan Danielson and a Christian. Like what separates the very good from the all-time legends. I think you can see it when you watch this match. But, so that we can get to the notes from this match, and this can maybe tell you some things. So PW Torch wrote, politics played a part in the decision to have Bryan Danielson face Christian in a tag match on May 12th. Neither side could come to an agreement on the finish of a singles match between them. TNA is wisely protecting their champion from doing jobs on independent dates, but are still allowing Samoa Joe to do jobs despite his undefeated streak in TNA. So, yeah, that's interesting where, they were okay with Joe, maybe because of Joe's legacy, or maybe they just didn't value Joe as much as Christian, or probably because Christian had the title. Oh, that's another thing we forgot to point out. Christian, despite being NWA heavyweight champion, does not bring the title to the show, leading to the crowd to chant multiple times, "Where's your belt?" Which was another funny note.
And another thing I want to mention, I'm sure they were paying Christian a lot more than they were paying Samoa Joe at this point, too.
Exactly.
In fact, I'm wondering if Joe was still on his first deal before he actually got over in TNA. So, I don't know that. I don't know what the timeline of his different contracts were, but I'm sure that Christian was making more money.
But it is interesting that sounds like Ring of Honor's first inclination was to book a singles match between the two. But yeah, TNA is definitely not going to let their champion lose to the Ring of Honor champion, even though the relations were better than they were at some points at this point.
Yeah, and I don't think Christian was doing hour-long draws at this point either.
I was about to say, the other thing, and if you want to say, well, they could do kind of a bullshit finish. I don't think Gabe typically liked to do really screwy finishes in the main events, and they had just kind of done, I think, a very well done, but a slightly screwy, unsatisfying finish in the Nigel Danielson title match. So yeah, really your only options, I feel like, were probably to either do a tag match or just don't do a Christian versus Danielson kind of match at all. But then the Observer, Dave, wrote, it was Christian's only Ring of Honor appearance as he teamed with Colt Cabana to defeat Bryan Danielson and Christopher Daniels when Christian pinned Daniels after an prettier in more than 28 minutes. Match dragged to the live crowd and was described as a good 20-minute match that went 30 minutes.
Fair description.
Yeah, the crowd nearly turned on Christian as well, and the feeling was in almost any other city they would have, but the crowd consisted of a lot of fans who came to see him particularly. He was fine, nothing like when Jeff Hardy came in, but also nothing in the other direction like Matt Hardy, who was super hot when he came in. So I thought that was an interesting comment. So Matt, you were there live. I did feel like listening to the crowd during this match. They never turned on this match, but I definitely felt like it was one of those matches where about halfway through, you could tell like they've lost the crowd a little bit. Like the crowd is definitely more excited in the first 5 minutes of this match than they are by like minute 18.
Well, because they tried to appease that one guy who wanted them to wrestle instead of roll. Yeah. You got to play for the whole crowd, not just that one guy.
But your memory, I always hate asking you these questions because your memory, it's hard to expect. But do you remember if like the crowd was on the verge of turning on this match?
Yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah,
I think the crowd, in general, just had like a negative attitude, like a lot of the show. Like, so but no, I don't think they, like, in fact, by the end, I think they were getting into the big moves at the end. So, yeah. But they sure did not react to that hot tag. I will say that. I don't think Christian was as over as I thought he would be. Like, he wasn't really being treated as some like huge star coming in. He was being treated like, oh yeah, Christian.
Yeah, and like I guess because Dave kind of raised the comparison, I would say like even though Jeff Hardy's appearance in Ring of Honor in 2003 is like infamous for the wrong reasons, I would say even he, like, there was a buzz in the air for him. He
felt like a bigger star, just you said, for the wrong reasons.
Yeah, that Christian, for whatever reason, just does not have here, even despite the fact that he's the number one guy in TNA at this point. He's about to, he's the champion. There's a pay-per-view 2 nights later that he's main eventing against Abyss. So
maybe this Long Island crowd doesn't love TNA as much as Gabe thought they did.
So then we go back to the Torch. They had a headline, Christian debuts for ROH. Christian team with Colt Cabana, blah, blah, blah. Torch correspondents indicate Christian didn't do much as he couldn't risk injury just 2 days before his NWA World title defense against Abyss on the TNA Sacrifice pay-per-view. Cabana worked the majority of the match. He and Cabana did a lot of comedy where they mocked Ring of Honor champ Danielson for being pale. Christian even called him a poor man's John Cena.
That's not what he said.
I wonder if Wade just got the wrong notes or if someone was trying to soft sell it.
Or Wade was like, I'm not going to print that line.
Yeah, exactly. Attendance was also said to be down from usual and quite small. The crowd was said to be flat and disruptive at times. And then Torch had one more note. Regarding Christian's match for Ring of Honor in Long Island, Gabe Sapolsky said, quote, Christian was great and the match really built well. Christian's performance was definitely up to my expectations and he was a pleasure to work with, which, I mean, what else is Gabe going to say? And,
I'm sure the last part was true.
Yeah, and we should point out, Christian does do one more match for Ring of Honor. At this point, it was sounding like, people were wondering, is this going to be his only performance? They do book him to face Christopher Daniels in a one more match. So they liked him enough to, maybe they had pre-agreed to it, just not announced it, but they liked him enough to bring him back for one more show.
Yeah, I have no reason to think that Christian was anything other than a total pro and pleasant to work with.
But that's another interesting theory, and I do think that's an interesting thing that we were starting to see more of in Ring of Honor at this point, and a reason, probably one of the reasons why Gabe was downshifting all but the most important guys to his promotion from TNA, which is this notion of sometimes Ring of Honor weekends would fall on TNA pay-per-view weekends, and you might have had – maybe that's a reason why Joe doesn't necessarily we don't get that Necro Butcher match the next night and stuff
Maybe definitely.
Yeah, there's we're getting to the point where these TNA wrestlers have to be kind of booked with a bit more kid gloves if you fall on a pay-per-view weekend, because these wrestlers are going to be concerned. Like maybe that's I believe Shelley works the TNA pay-per-view, but he does not work the next night for Ring of Honor. So
Yes.
It's the idea of these wrestlers are like concerned about injuries. And if they do get minorly banged up, they're not going to go stick their neck out for Ring of Honor, because TNA is now the number one priority for them.
Yeah. And I should have said definitely maybe for the Oasis reference, but either way.
And again, not blaming the wrestlers, but it's just the thing where I imagine Ring of Honor is probably getting to the point where it's like, unless it's a Samoa Joe level legend of this company, do we really want to be booking guys that are going to give some weekends 75%?
Yeah, no, I mean, ROH is built on the fact that they have the top quality wrestling. And it's like, no matter how big of a star somebody is, like, if they can't give ROH level performances, then they can't be the top star in ROH. Like, it's just like they set this precedent very early where they had, they were like, they're not just going to book, like the usual, like former big names from the indies, that used to be in like WWE or whatever, because they're selling work rate and great matches. And they have to be able to book guys who are willing to have great matches for them. Yeah. And you can't do that if you're not giving your hardest effort. And, I totally support wrestlers saving their bodies, and especially when you have a more important gig, like higher paying, whatever, more high profile. But ROH has to do what they have to do, and they have to promote the guys that are going to give them the DVD selling matches.
See, until TNA rose to this level of prominence, Ring of Honor was really in a lucky position because of just the way the wrestling scene was at this point for the first 2 years, where unless wrestlers like had tours of Japan, until they signed with WWE for the first 2 years of Ring of Honor, like Ring of Honor, if you worked for them, really was your number one priority. Like, if anything, you were canceling bookings and slouching for shows before Ring of Honor.
Yep.
To get to the Ring of Honor event. And so Ring of Honor was never up to this point in the position where wrestlers had to choose. Like, the choice was, WWE signed me, so I'm going to be gone forever. Or, okay, after this show, I'll be in Japan for 3 weeks. But it was never, I've got a bigger show the next night, so I'm going to take it easy. And this is the first era where we're seeing guys that are they're now Ring of Honor is for once like not the crown jewel of a lot of guys' schedules. It still is for a bunch of them,
right? Well, I mean, they Aries and Strong definitely showed their loyalty to ROH from that show in February with the Storm, and they got into trouble for it with TNA. So I know that ROH definitely appreciated that.
Yeah. So after the match, Christian grabs the mic and he says, "This disproves Danielson's theory of being the greatest wrestler and champion in the world today," which I know Christian is just trying to be stick it to the heel. But that line, "You're in Ring of Honor," so I felt like that was kind of like a slightly dickish thing. Like, you're not the greatest champion in the world today. It's like, well, he is the Ring of Honor champion and you are in Ring of Honor. But he goes, "You are the whitest human being, though." I love that's the only thing they have to Mark Danielson.
Yes,
you're doing good. If the only thing you have is something that you could correct, like if the only flaw you have is something that you could correct by going to a tanning booth for 45 minutes, like you're doing pretty good. Danielson leaves without shaking hands, but everyone else does. Christopher Daniels, in fact, raises Christian Cabana's hands very graciously. Christopher Daniels then gets on the mic and he says, for the past 4 years, he's been a part of Ring of Honor and TNA. A few fans boo, and then Daniel stops and he goes, no FTNA, no F Ring of Honor.
No one was chanting F Ring of Honor, Daniel.
Exactly. He's trying to act like it's equal. He says, this is about the best wrestlers in the world today, putting their lives on the line and giving them the respect they deserve. So the crowd at this point, he kind of bullies them into giving them an ovation. Christian starts a fallen angel chant for his buddy Daniels. And that's what we end in the ring. We go to backstage for a BJ Whitmer and Adam Pearce promo segment. A frustrated Adam Pearce wonders how many times they're going to get their asses kicked. Pearce says it doesn't matter. They will never surrender. He says he doesn't know what side Homicide's on, but that what they do know is tomorrow night Pearce and Whitmer are coming for a fight. He challenges the CZW guys to bring a crew. Samoa Joe then walks into frame and he says they're not the only ones up for a fight tomorrow night. And I felt like, Matt, this was the first time in the CZW Ring of Honor feud where we were kind of just like reheating things. Like, it felt like even with the brawls, like they were building this idea of, Pearce is really getting frustrated that they keep losing. And then they had the one where, they BJ beats Super Dragon, they throw him out, and I thought, like this is like the turning the tide. And then it felt like here they're just like they're just filling time to the next big moment in the feud. Like they're right back to, oh, we lost and we got our asses kicked and we're getting pissed off.
Well, they had to stall for one night, so I think it's okay.
Yeah. But that's the show, and this is crazy, Matt. I think we agreed that the Milestone series lived up to our memories and lived up to the hype, where every show was at least pretty darn good, and some of those shows were some of the best shows we've ever seen from Ring of Honor. That's like the best run of Ring of Honor shows in history, I would say. And now 2 of the first 3 shows after the Milestone series, the Weekend of Champions Night 1, and then this show, are like 2 of the most underwhelming shows I can remember we've covered on Through the Years. Like, I wonder, like, I was going to ask you, not only what do you think of the show, but do you think that there's a connection? Like, do you think it's just a coincidence, or do you think there is just something of a letdown maybe in the booking and in the performances when you have just that many major shows? And then this is the first shows after that, you know. I mean, Weekend of Champions Night 2 was a very good show, but maybe it's not a coincidence that 2 of the first 3 shows after that big series of shows that they put so much into, they saved so many big things for, turn out to be 2 of like the worst shows we've seen in quite some time.
It's not a coincidence. I think you're going to see this even more pronounced after Glory by Honor in the fall. There's a pretty extended lull in the quality of the shows in the fall of 2006. This is just a couple of week shows. Now, I will say this about how we roll. It's a bad show by ROH standards, but I actually think it's very, very, very marginally better than I remembered it. Very marginally. I remember going to this show and being like, oh my God, this is like so bad that I don't even know if I like Ring of Honor anymore. Like,
oh my God.
And then I went to the show the next night and it was like, oh, never mind. So like they course correct, like this was, I think besides just like the kind of like the natural letdown after they put a lot into a big series of shows, is we're seeing the results of having these double shots all the time. Because if you notice, the last week's show was the first half of a double shot. This is the first half of a double shot. And you're going to see in both cases, the second half of that double shot is a bajillion times better. And, you know, I think it's hard to balance that. Like it sucks that like when they have these 2 shows, like there's always going to have to be one that's lesser. You know, they can't do a Super Card of Honor followed by a Better Than Our Best every time. There's going to be one that's more of the setup show and one that's more of the payoff show. And it just is what it is. I think this show was also hurt by the fact that the crowd was exceptionally bad. You know, in some ways, maybe this was the worst crowd in the history of ROH to this point. Like, I really think that in some ways it was. And I think that's probably a part of it too. But you're going to see, you know, I don't want to tip my hand too much, but I already did. Like, the next show is a very fondly remembered show, and it's just like a million degrees away from what this was. And unfortunately, this was the much less important, much less prioritized of the 2 shows. And, yeah, we're going to see that a lot. I don't know if there's anything they could have done about that, but yeah, it's frustrating. Yeah.
I would say this is one of the least fun shows. I mean, the podcast redeems it. I always enjoy doing the podcast, but this was one of the least fun shows, like to the point where I was having a hard time finishing the show. And then, you know, we usually say most of our thoughts for each other for the podcast, so they're like new to each other. But like Matt actually like DM'd me at one point, like, I'm having a hard time getting through the show. And I was like, I was feeling the same way. And that is never happens for us. Like, maybe occasionally it's like, oh, that segment wasn't good or something. But like, yeah, I can't remember a show like this where both of us were just like, yeah, this is kind of tough sledding. And yet it's still, I always say Ring of Honor had such a high floor at this point. Like, I was trying to find a way to
it's not like Heroes of Wrestling or anything.
No, like I was trying to find a way to compliment this, and Matt, this is the other day when I was like brushing my teeth when I think about this stuff. This is the way the best call I could come up with. Like, if you were at an emergency room, stuck there for like 7 hours in a waiting room, and for some reason How We Roll was playing on the TV, like it would be more entertaining to watch How We Roll than like look at the floor if you didn't have your phone with you, or like look at the wall. Like
this is something that you've thought of based on past experiences, I'm sure.
Yes, like there are definitely things in life where it's like, you know what, I almost don't even want to watch this TV. I would rather just look at the floor. Like, there is some entertainment value to be had if you have literally nothing to do in the world. If tomorrow like something happens that destroys all media except for How We Roll, like, you should watch it once or twice.
Yeah, and I'll just add this. Sometimes you get that, like, well, it's more entertaining because it's so bad it's good. This isn't that. This isn't like so bad it's good. This is just like there's some decently entertaining stuff on it, but it's just not good enough for an ROH show in 2006 or in any other era.
That's a great point. I would actually say, in that sense, I would actually rather watch Heroes of Wrestling again than this, because there's a perverse What? Pardon me?
I said maybe. Yeah.
I was just because there is a so bad it's good quality, and this is like you said, there is not a so bad it's good. It's just kind of blandly a little below average. And at some point, you get to a level where it's almost like if this was just a little bit worse, it'd be kind of fun, or if it was a little bit better, it'd be actually good. Instead, it's just this is how it rolls. So
that's how they roll.
But and I guess the last thing I want to say about this is just. This is not like revisionist history or us being contrarian, because I just want to point out, because we hardly ever give a negative review. I want to know, like, this is what people thought at the time about the show. I remember even at the time on message boards when people like on the message boards be like, oh, what Ring of Honor shows should I buy? I'm catching up, or they're having a sale. This would always be one of the ones where it's like, oh, this is one of the easiest skips you can have. You're missing nothing if you do not buy How We Roll, even if it was on sale for like $10. Like,
I mean, I can vouch for this. Like, I was there. I thought it was bad at the time. I thought it was, in some ways, it was definitely the worst ROH show I had been to, for sure. But yeah, I mean, what are you gonna say? It was not good.
Yeah. So, plugs through the years at gmail.com is how you can get in contact with us. That's THROH for through. At Trevor Dame on Twitter. At Mayor MGF on Twitter. Yeah, and obviously you know where to find the podcast, because you have the podcast. So next time on the show, we will be covering the second half of the double shot Ring of Homicide. That's going to have the Briscoes versus Aries and Strong in the tag titles, Delirious versus Danielson 2 for the world title, Homicide and Necro Butcher. And Matt, my memories on the show aren't great, but because my memory is typically bad, but I'm just going to say this. I guarantee that's going to be more fun than this show.
My memories of that show are great, because I'll just leave this tease. One of the most memorable shows I ever went to.
Wow.
In a good way.
that will be great. So, until then, looking forward to it. Welcome to 2023. Until next time, have a good time. Have a great time.